Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to the final phase of Conquer Prelims. In this phase, we are discussing the most important current affairs of the last 4 to 5 months, from January to end of April 2026. These topics are extremely important for the upcoming prelims exam because if you have seen previous question papers, a lot of current affairs topics, especially from subjects like international relations, they have been picked from developments in the months of January to April. So today, I'll be discussing at least around 35 topics which are extremely crucial for the upcoming prelims examination. So before we begin, I have one quick announcement. This is especially for 2027 aspirants. If you're looking to prepare with us, if you want a structured program with clear timetable and live and recorded lectures, along with all the study material and test series and mentorship, then Unacademy is launching the summit batch from the 4th of May. It's a new batch which is aimed at 2027 prelims. And this would be the best time to join the class because Unacademy has extended the flat 60% off. And the subscription is now available at just 16,999. So those interested, please check out the link provided in the description below. And to avail the discount, you have to enter the code IAS English. So with this, let's get started and look at the first topic. The month of January was quite busy as far as geopolitical developments are concerned. In the first week of Jan itself, we had a groundbreaking development in South America, where the US executed a complex military operation violating the sovereignty of Venezuela and kidnapped the then president Nicolas Maduro. So, in all the topics that we are going to discuss today, I will mainly focus on the facts, locations, and some important details that are relevant only from the prelims perspective. We will not go into the analysis of these topics. That's not required for prelims exam. From a subject like IR, questions which are based on current affairs would be factual or you would require some in-depth knowledge of that particular topic. So that is exactly what we are going to discuss today. So let's start with the location of Venezuela. You can definitely expect a question on this. I'm saying this confidently because if you look at previous question papers, whenever there was a major escalation in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, direct questions, geography based questions were asked on these countries. So when you look at Venezuela, you should be aware of its exact location, the neighboring countries, and the nearby geographical features. So Venezuela is located in the northern part of South America and it shares a border with Colombia towards the west and southwest region. And the southern border is shared with Brazil. Towards the east, it shares a border with Guyana. Then it faces the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. And also, please note, the capital of the country is Caracas. That's where the American military operation was carried out to kidnap Nicolas Maduro. And off the coast of Venezuela, there is one small country located over here in the Caribbean Sea, which shares a maritime boundary with Venezuela. Now, can you find out the name of this country? It's a small Caribbean island nation and it has a significant Indian diaspora. A very large Indian community is found in this country. So, can you find out the name of this country in the Caribbean Sea that shares maritime boundaries with Venezuela? Please let me know the answer in the comments. Now, let's understand as to what happened and let's try to draw out some key facts and details which are relevant for prelims examination. See, Donald Trump has been targeting Venezuela since his first presidency. Between 2016 and 2020, the United States had launched its course of diplomacy aimed at Maduro's regime. This was primarily on ideological lines and also driven by economic interests because US under Donald Trump has been trying to dominate the Americas region. So during the first presidency, Nicolas Maduro was charged by the Trump administration of involvement in drug trafficking. He was even accused of being the leader of organized drug cartels that operate from Venezuela. Based on this, the US brought in crippling economic sanctions, which had a severe impact on Venezuela's oil economy. In 2018 and 19, these sanctions were expanded. And the reason why I'm mentioning this old development is because India was affected by these American sanctions on Venezuela. India was compelled by the US to stop oil imports from Venezuela. India was already procuring oil from Venezuela, and we had made some investments. ONGC Videsh Limited had made investments in Venezuela's oil fields. So India had to completely cut down these investments and stop the oil procurement because of the American sanctions. This was one of the first instances where India had followed unilateral sanctions. During the same duration, India had to cut off oil trade with Iran as well. India completely zeroed out oil imports from Iran during the same period when Iran was also targeted with crippling American sanctions. So that is one reason why this slightly old development could also become important. There might be a statement related to this. So now, when Trump came back into office last year in January, they immediately started targeting Maduro's regime. They designated two criminal cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, I want you to remember the names of these drug cartels: Tren de Aragua and Cartel of the Suns. These are two prominent organized criminal cartels that operate in South America, and they're believed to be connected with Venezuela's leadership. Even without enough evidence, the US administration accused Nicolas Maduro of supporting, backing, and even heading groups such as Cartel of the Suns, and they were declared as foreign terrorist organizations by the US State Department. Based on this, the US started pursuing action against Nicolas Maduro. Imagine, the sovereign head of a foreign country was being pursued by the Trump administration. This itself raises a lot of questions about international law being violated. Of course, I'll come to that point a little later. We'll discuss the international law and the legal aspect in a few minutes. But first, let's understand what kind of escalation did the US carry out. Starting from June, July 2025, the United States declared a war on drugs, calling Maduro one of the biggest narco trafficker in the world. And it started a huge military mobilization into the Caribbean Sea. Under Operation Southern Sphere, kindly remember the name of this military operation. Under Operation Southern Sphere, the US carried out a massive military deployment, deploying warships, aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and drones, and mobilized more than 10,000 soldiers to essentially be prepared for any escalation with Venezuela. And then they started targeting fishing boats and vessels. Even civilian vessels were bombed, and many civilians were killed in contravention of international law. Because you can't go and blatantly kill civilians without ample evidence. The US said that these boats were trafficking drugs like fentanyl. But most of the evidence available suggests that the fentanyl that enters the US primarily comes through Mexico through the land route, not through the sea route. So that's where questions of credibility have come up. But nevertheless, the US carried out bombing of civilian vessels, killing many civilians in the Caribbean Sea. That's why Operation Southern Sphere can be very, very important. Then US publicly announced that the CIA is actively conducting a clandestine covert operation aimed at destabilizing the regime, aimed at targeting Nicolas Maduro himself. Then US Navy imposed a blockade trying to prevent Venezuela from exporting oil and from receiving vessels from Russia or China, which are known to provide arms and other logistical support to Venezuela's leadership. So proper naval blockade was also imposed. And that's the reason why Operation Southern Sphere was in the news. Now, please look at the map here. In this map, you can see the American military mobilization happening in Gulf of Mexico, which Trump has renamed as Gulf of America. And massive troops were mobilized towards Puerto Rico. Now, I expect a question to be asked related to Puerto Rico. You should know what is the status of Puerto Rico, because the US has a massive military base over here from where the operations against Venezuela were staged. Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory of the US. There can be a direct question related to this. It's an unincorporated territory of the United States. Formerly, it was a Spanish colony, and US had taken over post the exit of Spain from this region. And since then, it has been an unincorporated territory of the United States. So the citizens of Puerto Rico, they are citizens of the US. They even have representation in the US Senate and US Congress. Is that clear? Though they don't have voting rights, but they do have a nominal representation in the US House of Representatives and in the US Senate. So it's an unincorporated territory of the US where it operates a huge military base from where Operation Southern Sphere was staged. Now, coming to the kind of military deployment that was seen, the US mobilized MQ-9B Reaper drones, which were not only used for reconnaissance and surveillance, it was used for targeted strikes against civilian boats. Then the biggest aircraft carrier was also mobilized in the region along with multiple warships, and as well as the F-35 fighter jets were forward positioned towards Venezuela. And eventually, in the first week of January, the US carried out the stealth operation, codenamed as Operation Absolute Resolve, which was aimed at toppling Nicolas Maduro from his seat and kidnapping him and extracting him back to the United States so that he can be tried and prosecuted. So American Special Forces, along with the CIA, carried out one of the most audacious military operation where they carried out airstrikes in Caracas. They essentially disabled Venezuelan air defenses and power grids were brought down through cyber attacks. And a team of elite special forces, they managed to kidnap Nicolas Maduro and his wife and extracted him back to the US. So this operation to extract Nicolas Maduro was codenamed as Operation Absolute Resolve. So please remember both of them. Operation Southern Sphere was the military mobilization to exert that pressure on Venezuela to target narco trafficking. And Operation Absolute Resolve was the mission to kidnap Nicolas Maduro. Now, coming to the legality of this action, this is where UPSC can ask questions. Are such actions legal where a country's sovereignty is being blatantly violated? What does the UN Charter tell us about the sovereignty of a nation? So you need to know about Article 2 and Article 51. And under the UN, is there any institution which has the authority to authorize the use of force or to approve the use of coercive action against a UN member state? These are few technical details of international law that you must be aware of. Under Article 2, Clause 4, the use of force against any country is explicitly prohibited. Article 2, Clause 4 clearly states all UN members must refrain, they shall refrain from using force against the integrity of a nation or even issuing threats, verbal threats, which could weaken the political independence of a state. So it not only prohibits military action, it not only prohibits military aggression and the use of military force, it even prohibits issuing threats against the political independence and territorial integrity of a state. But as you know, most countries, especially big powers, they often ignore this particular provision of the UN Charter. Under Article 2, Clause 3, the UN Charter provides for all disputes, any dispute, conflict, or issue to be resolved only through diplomatic negotiations, only through peaceful means. Given the number of conflicts we are seeing, I think these two provisions are very, very important for your exams. So just make a note of it. Now, we should also understand, are there any circumstances where the UN itself can intervene militarily? What if there is a rogue state? What if there is a country which is breaking international law, threatening the global community, threatening global peace and security? Then will UN remain silent, or does UN have some authority to act? According to the UN Charter, this authority lies only with the UN Security Council. The UNSC can either impose economic sanctions or it can even authorize the use of force against another UN member state. If a state is breaching peace and stability in a region, posing a threat to global order, to peace and security in the world, according to Article 39, the Security Council has a right to determine whether this rogue state is a threat to global stability, to global peace. If the UNSC members, especially the P5 countries, the 5 permanent members, if they're all on the same page, then they can even authorize coercive action under Article 42 of the UN Charter. They can even approve imposition of economic sanctions under Article 41, or they can authorize the use of military force under Article 42. For example, when Afghanistan was invaded by a US-led coalition force after the 9/11 attacks, the UNSC had authorized the invasion of Afghanistan. And many countries have faced economic sanctions through the UN, North Korea being one example. So under Article 41, UNSC can authorize the imposition of economic sanctions. Under Article 42, it can approve the use of military force as well. Now coming to the right of a nation to defend itself. What if a country is attacked by someone else? What if another state actor has attacked our country, violated our sovereignty and territorial integrity? Even in that state, should we exercise restraint? Should we ensure that we don't use force? That is not the case. Under international law, under Article 51 of UN Charter, a country can use force in self-defense. If you're acting in self-defense, right, you can use military force to defend your country, to defend your sovereignty and your territorial integrity. But there is a precondition. The condition is that there has to be an armed attack. There has to be an armed attack by an external power. Only in such a scenario you can justify the use of force in self-defense and claim that you're acting in self-defense. But countries like US, Israel, they have pioneered a new doctrine to basically exploit the legal loopholes. Whenever they violate the sovereignty of their target country, they call it a preemptive strike. They will claim that they had intelligence that an attack on their country was imminent. So to prevent the attack, they will carry out a preemptive strike before the armed aggression can occur. Now this falls under a legal gray area. There is no specific provision that deals with preemptive strikes. Preemptive use of force is not provided under international law. At the same time, it is not prohibited under UN Charter. So countries like US and Israel, they exploit this legal loophole, and whenever they violate the sovereignty of a country, they claim that they're acting in preemptive self-defense. They claim that they have intelligence that there is an attack which was imminent, and that's why we attacked them first. But this is not sustainable under international law. It falls into this legal gray area, and it also highlights the gaps within the UN Charter. And the UN itself is a very weak institution in that regard. It can't really hold the P5 countries accountable. The 5 permanent members who have the veto with them, they can never be truly held accountable because of the elite status they have given to themselves by being the permanent members of the UNSC. And within the UNSC, as you know, there is a clear division with Russia, China on one side and US, UK, France on the other side. So they've used UN and the UNSC primarily for their own geopolitical agendas. So whenever US or its allies commit violations, they can never be held accountable because even if, let's say, Russia, China bring a resolution, the US and its allies, or let's say UK or France, they'll defeat the resolution by using their veto. Same holds good for Russia. When Russia was brought up at UNSC after invading Ukraine, which was a violation of the UN Charter, China ensured it protected Russia by using the veto. So that's why you don't see any action being taken against the P5 countries or their closest allies like Israel. So I hope this topic is clear. Now, there are few related topics to this development itself where questions can be asked. There can be a question related to the Monroe and Donroe doctrine. Because you need to understand, why did US act against Venezuela? Why did it blatantly use force, violated sovereignty of the country and kidnapped a sitting president? See, the US justification is that under the Trump administration, the US has prioritized national security. And Mr. Trump believes in establishing the primacy of United States in the Americas region. That is primarily in the Western Hemisphere. He wants to ensure that the US is the predominant power with no external interference. Of late, powers like China, Russia also to some extent, they have been meddling and interfering in America's backyard. Like how Indian Ocean is India's backyard. We hope to be the preeminent power in the Indian Ocean region. Similarly, the US believes that it is the preeminent power in Western Hemisphere, and this has been reiterated under the new national security strategy of the US. So there can be a question related to the NSS document that was recently brought out by the Trump administration. Under the new national security strategy, Donald Trump has revived the Monroe Doctrine of 1800s. So there can be a history related question, world history question on Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine goes back to 1823 when then President James Monroe, he stated that the Western Hemisphere, that is the Americas region, North America, Central America, Caribbean, and South America region, this entire region is the backyard of United States alone. This was a message to the European colonial powers of that era. Because Spain, Portugal, France, Britain, they had all colonized these African territories, these American territories. So under James Monroe, the US drew a red line and forced the European colonial powers to back off from the Americas region. Essentially, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the US wanted to be seen as the preeminent power from North America to Latin America. And this was a warning from the US for European colonial powers to back off from the Americas region, to ensure that US can access all the resources present here, to ensure that US will be the predominant military, political, and economic power in the Americas region. So this old doctrine of the US is something which has been followed by many presidents. Now Trump has given it a new twist. He has revived it under the new national security strategy, and experts are even calling it the Donroe Doctrine. Right? And Trump loves giving himself credit, as you know, and he has essentially named it after himself. He himself said this is the Donroe Doctrine. Right? Usually such names are given by someone else, but Trump has no such hesitation. But jokes apart, there can be a question on Monroe-Donroe Doctrine. Please understand that it's a reiteration of America's primacy in the Americas region, in the North and Latin America region. Now let's quickly talk about the real intent behind these military operations. It was not just about ideology. It was not because Maduro was a leftist authoritarian leader. It was also not about human rights or the economic well-being of the Venezuelan people. And it was definitely not about America's security, or it was not about fighting drugs. Because if it was genuinely about fighting drugs, the drugs mainly come from Colombia. It comes from Mexico, mainly through the land route more than the sea route. So here the target was Venezuela, and Trump was quite open about this, that this was about oil. Immediately after Maduro was kidnapped, in the press conference, Trump did not even hesitate to say that US had a capitalist interest to benefit American corporates to go back and extract Venezuela's oil wealth. Because this country has the world's largest known oil reserves. So please be aware of the basic facts. Venezuela is said to have 303 billion barrels of crude oil, accounting for nearly 17 to 19% of the total known oil reserve deposits. And Venezuela has a particular type of oil. It has extra heavy crude oil. Extra heavy crude is quite difficult to process because it's very thick, it's very viscous, it has very high viscosity, and you need specialist refining equipment to handle such heavy, extra heavy crude oil, and it's not easy to process that. So there was a time when American oil companies, energy companies, had access to Venezuela's energy deposits. But with the rise of leftist governments and pro-Soviet and pro-Russian governments, Venezuela had nationalized the oil wealth, keeping US and its companies away from the country. So now Trump is quite open about this, that US will primarily exploit these resources. If you look at the new regime which has been installed under the former vice president, who has now become the interim leader of Venezuela, they have basically submitted to American demands. Delcy Rodriguez has accepted that US companies will now have access to the oil wealth of Venezuela. In fact, Venezuela's oil vessels were seized by the US Navy, which again raises questions of sovereignty and international law. You can't simply go and seize the vessels and resources of another country, but US has done it. So this represents the breakdown of rules-based order, where big powers are hardly showing any respect towards international rules. Be it Russia, be it Israel, be it US, be it China. We are seeing the dismantling of the rules-based world order. So please be aware of the kind of resources present in Venezuela, particularly the oil resources, and what is America's interest in Venezuela's oil wealth. Now, since we are talking about Venezuela's oil deposits, it's important to be aware of the location as well from a geography perspective. Venezuela's oil wealth is primarily concentrated along the Orinoco River belt. The Orinoco River, which flows down from Colombia and eventually drains into the Caribbean and the Atlantic. It's around this river delta and the basin where much of Venezuela's extra heavy crude oil deposits are found. It also has oil deposits in its exclusive economic zone here in the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean. Then recently, Venezuela has picked a territorial dispute with neighboring country Guyana. Just a few years ago, massive oil deposits were discovered in Guyana in the Essequibo oil basin. This essentially would be the Essequibo oil basin. You can see that here off the coast of Guyana. Guyana has recently discovered massive oil reserves, and as a result, Venezuela has unilaterally made territorial claims, triggering a border dispute and a land dispute with Guyana. Now, this is of concern for India because Guyana also has a huge Indian community. In fact, recently, Prime Minister Modi has visited Guyana. Even Suriname, located next to it, has a big Indian community over there. So any further escalation or any further tensions would affect the Indian community and Indian interests. India has been investing in Guyana's oil resources as well. We are looking to procure oil from the Essequibo Basin, which is now disputed between Venezuela and Guyana. So these are some important locations that you should be aware of: the Orinoco Basin and the Essequibo region. Now let's take up this prelims practice question based on what we have discussed, and let's see how many of you can answer this. Please read the question. I'll give you some time. Consider the following statements. The Orinoco Belt and Essequibo Belt, which contain massive oil deposits, belongs to Venezuela. Venezuela's large deposits is primarily made up of extra heavy crude, which is easy to extract and process. So you basically have to check which of these statements is or are correct. So what is the right answer? Ankesh says answer is A. Aniruddha says it is B. But most of the students are saying it is D. Okay, let's check both the statements. Statement 1 is definitely wrong. I just told you the Essequibo Belt, it belongs to Guyana. It does not belong to Venezuela. Though it is disputed, Venezuela has made claims. It actually belongs to Guyana, not Venezuela. Orinoco Belt, yes, it belongs to Venezuela. But statement 1 becomes wrong. Second statement, part of it is correct. That Venezuela's large deposits of oil is mainly made up of extra heavy crude, which is right. But it's not easy to extract and process because of its high viscosity and thickness. It's very hard to extract and process extra heavy crude. So both of them are incorrect. Option D is the right answer, neither one nor two. So I'll include as many questions as possible so you get some practice as well, because I know a lot of students are preparing at the last minute, or you just want a quick revision along with some practice questions. So for each topic, I've included lots of questions today, and let's keep solving them as we discuss these topics. So I hope this is understood. Now let's move to the next topic. Shaksgam Valley was in the news. Recently, India reasserted its claims over Shaksgam Valley. India's Ministry of External Affairs stated that Shaksgam Valley is Indian territory. It's an integral part of Indian territory. So let's quickly understand what is the relevance of Shaksgam Valley, where is it located, and what kind of questions can be asked from this particular topic. See, the Shaksgam Valley occupies a strategic location in the Jammu and Kashmir Ladakh region. Now, this region was illegally occupied by Pakistan when it took Gilgit-Baltistan back in 1947. And later on in 1963, through a boundary agreement with China, it handed over Shaksgam Valley to Chinese control. I mean, after the 1962 India-China war, it was obvious that for both Pakistan and China, India was a hostile neighbor. So it led to a collusion between them, a nexus. And as their strategic ties started growing, they realized they could jointly work together to contain India. Pakistan signed this boundary agreement, the Sino-Pakistan boundary agreement, to lease the strategic Shaksgam Valley to China. Now, please look at the map. Of course, I'm showing you the disputed map of India, right? But without that, you can't understand uh, the territory and the location of Shaksgam Valley and the important locations that are present here. Now, you can see the erstwhile state of J&K, right? That's something that belongs to India entirely. The erstwhile state of J&K, which used to be a princely state, that includes today's union territories of J&K and Ladakh, right? The whole region belongs to India. There is no doubt about it. But as Pakistan took this part of the territory from the Kashmir region and Gilgit-Baltistan region, right? This would be Gilgit-Baltistan towards the Trans-Karakoram tract in the higher reaches of the Karakoram. So Pakistan not only illegally occupied this territory and went to war with India, but later on, it handed over this strategic area called Shaksgam Valley to China in 1963. See, it is this region, which is the Shaksgam Valley region, located in the Trans-Karakoram, in the Hunza Gilgit region, located in the upper reaches, in the northern reaches of the Karakoram tract. And right below Shaksgam, you have this strategic location, the Siachen Glacier. You can see the Siachen Glacier here, where India maintains a dominant position and control, especially since 1984. After Operation Meghdoot, India ensured that we occupied the strategic vantage points at Siachen. And since then, India controls a large part of the Siachen Glacier, giving us a pivotal position in this region. Whereas this entire green shaded area, which is the Indian territory that is illegally occupied by Pakistan, remains under Pakistani control. That includes parts of Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan region. And you can also see Aksai Chin over here, that China has illegally occupied from India. In fact, for China, this was critical because it wanted to connect Tibet with Xinjiang, the two frontier regions and the problematic regions of China, which it had annexed by force. Right? China would annex Xinjiang and later annex Tibet by 1950. And in both Xinjiang and Tibet, China faced unrest by the native communities. The Tibetan Buddhists rebelled against Chinese occupation. The Uyghur Muslims rebelled against Chinese occupation. So for China, security was a priority in the 1950s. So it wanted to connect both the regions through a strategic road, the G219 highway. And for that, Aksai Chin was critical for China. So as China took Aksai Chin and Pakistan had illegally occupied these parts of Indian territory, Siachen Glacier became all the more important for us. And in 1984, India cemented its position. So this boundary here, the temporary border that we have, is the line of control, previously called the ceasefire line until 1971-72. But after that, it has been renamed as the line of control. So the northernmost point of LOC ends right at Siachen, just below the Siachen Glacier. It's called point NJ9842. Point NJ9842 is the northernmost point of the LOC. On the other side, we have a temporary de facto border with China, that is in the Aksai Chin belt, which is the LAC, the line of actual control. So you can understand why Shaksgam is so critical for Pakistan, for China, for India as well. Now, the concern for us is that the CPEC project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, it passes through Shaksgam Valley. So this is a direct threat for our sovereignty. India claims the entire region to be an integral part of our sovereignty, and which is the right legal and technical position. But China, which has had access to Shaksgam from 1963, it has deployed PLA troops, it has built infrastructure in Gilgit-Baltistan, it has built roads, railway lines, it has even built dams and hydropower projects. And today it is setting up the CPEC project to connect Kashgar, a major commercial town city in Xinjiang, with Pakistani ports of Gwadar and Karachi. China has invested heavily in revamping the Gwadar port, and it is setting up this economic corridor. Because see, for China, this is strategically crucial. I'm sure you understand why choke points like Hormuz and Malacca are critical, especially after the Iran war started. Now, China has a lot of dependency on oil imports, just like India. And China depends heavily on Malacca Strait. It not only depends on Hormuz, like India and other Asian countries, it depends heavily on Malacca Strait as well. So, one option for China to bypass Malacca, to reduce its dependency on Malacca, is the CPEC project. Because through CPEC corridor, it can directly access the Arabian Sea and Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, from where China gets a large part of its oil and gas. So with CPEC project, China can directly transport the Persian uh, and the West Asian oil and gas through Pakistani ports like Gwadar directly into Xinjiang, thus reducing its dependency on Malacca. It can bypass Malacca Strait. So China has been stepping up its military presence, its construction projects under the larger Belt and Road Initiative. That's why India opposes the CPEC project. We have boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative as it goes against Indian sovereignty. It passes through POK. So India not only opposes CPEC project, we have boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative itself. So recently, this issue came up again when Pakistan and China were stepping up their engagement and activities in Shaksgam Valley. India reiterated that this is Indian territory, and China retaliated back by saying that it has a right to be present in Shaksgam Valley because it's part of a deal with Pakistan. So this remains an unresolved issue, a issue which could easily create more tensions. So being aware of these basic details can be very important for the prelims exam. Now take up this practice question. Consider the following statements regarding Shaksgam Valley. It was ceded illegally by Pakistan to China under a boundary agreement in 1963. It lies to the south of Karakoram Range and is part of the larger Gilgit-Baltistan region. The valley is strategically located near the Siachen Glacier region. So what's the right answer? Let's see how many of you can answer this. It's a pretty straightforward question if you paid attention to what we were discussing. And if you saw the map that I was showing you, I think it becomes pretty clear as to what is the correct answer. You need to tell me how many of the statements is or are correct. Many of them are saying option C, but Pawan says it is option B. Okay. Statement 1 is correct, right? It was illegally ceded by Pakistan. It's Indian territory that Pakistan has illegally occupied and ceded to China through a 1963 boundary agreement. Second statement is wrong. The second statement is incorrect. Why? It's not present to the south of Karakoram. It's present in the Trans-Karakoram tract, in the higher reaches, in the northern reaches of the Karakoram. It's present to the north of the Karakoram range. So option 2 or statement 2 is wrong. It's incorrect. It is part of Gilgit-Baltistan. This is correct. This part of the statement is right. But it's not to the south of Karakoram. It's in the Trans-Karakoram tract, towards the northern part of Karakoram range. And yes, it is strategically located near the Siachen Glacier, quite close to Siachen, right next to it. So 3 is correct. 1 and 3 are correct. Option B is the right answer. See, many of you initially said option C. That's why you have to read the question carefully. So I hope these sessions, these practice MCQs will help you, right? Be careful. Read every word. Pay attention to the entire statement. Though you know the topic, you might go wrong. That should never happen in the actual prelims exam. Now let's talk about the next topic, which was in news, ADMM-Plus. There are many small topics which you might miss because many of you may not have read newspapers regularly, right? Many of you try to depend on these magazines, which may not cover all the topics. So let's cover many small topics that were in news from Jan to April. And then there are a few bigger topics I'll come back to. ADMM-Plus was in the news because India hosted the expert working group on counterterrorism. There was a tabletop exercise on counterterrorism that was planned under ADMM Plus grouping. And to prepare for this tabletop exercise, which is a military exercise, a simulated military exercise, the expert working group meeting of ADMM-Plus took place in India on counterterrorism. So what is ADMM-Plus? And there is a related group called ADMM. ADMM stands for ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting. And ADMM-Plus is an extension of ADMM, which has more countries as compared to the ADMM group. So first, let's talk about ADMM. Then I'll come to ADMM-Plus. The ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, as the name itself tells you, it's a group where the defense ministers of ASEAN countries get together to discuss the security issues of Southeast Asia and the larger Indo-Pacific region. When you look at the map of Southeast Asia, you will realize that Southeast Asia, it predominantly has a maritime character to it. It is bound by Bay of Bengal, Andaman Sea, Gulf of Thailand, South China Sea. The entire Indo-Pacific has a maritime character to it. So focusing on maritime security is not a choice. It's not an option for the Southeast Asian countries. If they have to be stable and secure, they have to prioritize maritime security. They have to deal with various threats, from piracy to other forms of organized crime, from drug smuggling to arms trafficking to human trafficking. In fact, Southeast Asia region is a hub for organized criminal activities, especially the Golden Triangle region that includes Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and even Cambodia. These countries in Southeast Asia, which are very close to India as well, Myanmar even shares a land border with India. It's one of the biggest hubs for drug production and drug trafficking, along with many other forms of organized crime, from arms and human trafficking to even cyber crimes. Today, many cyber scam compounds exist over here. There are illegal casinos, gambling centers. There is rampant trafficking of wildlife products as well, which poses an environmental threat. And the proceeds of these criminal activities can end up funding and financing terrorist and insurgent activities. Because there is a direct connection between the money generated from organized criminal activities, money laundering, and terror financing. So there is a free flow of drugs, weapons, and money in the region, which poses a serious security threat for Southeast Asian countries and also the other nations present in Indo-Pacific. Plus, we have China. China, which is exercising a lot of military aggression, threatens the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Southeast Asian countries. With regard to the South China Sea dispute, China claims the territories of Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei, be it the Paracel group of islands or Spratly group of islands. China tries to claim a large part of the exclusive economic zone in South China Sea, and it has adopted a very aggressive military posture that threatens Southeast Asian countries. So that's why security is a top priority for them. And also, don't forget, the region is highly prone to natural disasters. Right? It sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's prone to volcanoes, earthquakes, landslides, and floods and tsunamis. So it's important for the armed forces of the region to work together to focus on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, to carry out disaster management operations, to help other countries, friendly nations, in conducting search and rescue, or providing first aid and emergency relief when a disaster occurs in the region. So because of all these factors, security ties are very crucial. That's why the ASEAN countries founded the ADMM in 2006. Please make a note. The ASEAN nations, which is a political and economic grouping of Southeast Asian countries, they adopted a plan of action called the ASEAN Security Community. They basically focused on collective security. So ASEAN provides for military cooperation and defense ties. Under the Bali Concord, the second Bali Concord, the ASEAN nations established the ASEAN Security Community, which led to the foundation of the ADMM in 2006. So every year, the defense ministers of ASEAN countries meet. Previously, it would be 10 defense ministers because ASEAN had only 10 member countries. Now, last year, a new member has joined. Timor-Leste or East Timor has become the latest member of ASEAN, right? East Timor or Timor-Leste has joined the group last year. So now 11 defense ministers of the member countries of ASEAN, they meet under ADMM, and it's an annual meeting focused on all these security challenges of the region. Now, the very same countries, they have an extended security group called ADMM-Plus. It brings together the 11 members of ASEAN with 8 dialogue partners of ASEAN. See, ASEAN has given dialogue partner status to some of the major powers of the Indo-Pacific region. This includes India. India is one of the dialogue partners. In 1990s, by 95-96, India was recognized as one of the dialogue partners of ASEAN after we had launched the Look East policy of India. Then even China, Japan, Republic of Korea, that's South Korea, New Zealand and Australia, United States and even Russia. These 8 major powers of the Indo-Pacific, they have been given dialogue partner status, and ASEAN countries work with them through ADMM Plus to focus on defense and security issues of the region. So this initiative was launched in 2010 in Vietnam. Initially, it was a biennial event, meaning it would be held once in 2 years. But now, from 2017, it has become an annual meeting. See, these are the facts that are important for your prelims. Understood? You have to remember these basic facts and details. Initially, when it was launched in 2010, it used to be a biennial meeting of ADMM Plus countries. From 2017, it has become an annual affair. So every year, India's defense minister participates with the other 17 defense ministers, or now 18 defense ministers, to address the security issues of Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. So this is your practice question. Based on what we have discussed, a very simple, straightforward question. ADMM and ADMM Plus are the highest defense mechanism within ASEAN, focusing on regional security. Member countries are obligated to come to the defense of ASEAN countries. India has supplied weapons to at least 3 ASEAN countries. Which of these statements, or rather how many of these statements, is or are correct? Let's see if you guys can answer this. What is the correct answer? How many of these statements are correct? Only 1, only 2, or all 3 are correct, or none of the above? Many of them are saying C. That's all 3 statements are correct. Okay. But some are saying B. Very few students are saying B. Okay, let's go statement by statement. Statement 1 is obviously correct. Right? We just understood it's the highest defense mechanism within ASEAN. Both ADMM and ADMM Plus, they provide for defense cooperation amongst the member countries focused on the Southeast Asia region. Second statement is wrong. Second statement is incorrect. See, it's not an obligation for the members to come to the defense of the ASEAN countries. This is the principle of collective defense as seen under NATO. If you look at a military alliance like NATO, under Article 5, NATO countries have a binding obligation with regard to collective defense. They treat the attack on one NATO member as an attack on the entire alliance, and all the NATO members have to come to the defense of the other country. But such a provision does not exist with ADMM or ADMM Plus. Now always think of it logically, even if you don't know whether this is true or not. Think, would India go to the defense of, let's say, Thailand? Would India go to the defense of Philippines? Would India go and defend Indonesia if they are attacked by someone else? We would never do that. We would never take up binding obligations, especially in military clubs and military alliances. Right? So based on this common knowledge, conceptual understanding of India's foreign policy, you can rule out statement number 2. Is that clear? There is no principle of collective defense here. Though they look at collective security, They'll collectively work towards securing the region. It's not a binding obligation on the members to come to the defense of another country if they're attacked. So this is not part of it. India would never take such binding military commitments, right? We would never be part of such military clubs. That is something you see in NATO. NATO has such a principle where all members have to come to the defense of the other NATO countries which might be attacked. But this does not exist with ADMM, ADMM-Plus. Third statement is absolutely right. India has supplied weapons, even advanced weapons, to at least 3 ASEAN countries. Do you want me to tell which countries are those, or will you find them out? Which are the 3 ASEAN countries to which we have supplied weapons, especially in recent years? In the past couple of decades, we have been supplying arms and weapons, even advanced military hardware has been supplied to at least 3 ASEAN countries. Very good. Philippines is one of them. India has recently supplied the BrahMos cruise missile. Vietnam is another country. We regularly provide military supplies to Vietnam because we operate common defense equipment of Soviet and Russian origin, be it the Sukhoi 30 fighter jets or the Soviet Russian submarines. So we have similar military hardware. So we provide them with spare parts, we assist them with training, and we supply some of the components to maintain the Sukhoi jets and the Russian submarines that they have. So we do provide military supplies to Vietnam. Which is the other country? It's Myanmar. Myanmar is a recipient of Indian arms and military supplies from many, many years. We have supplied small ammunition and small arms. We have recently donated a submarine, an old Russian submarine, which was decommissioned by Indian Navy, was donated to Myanmar. So we have active military supplies to Myanmar. Clear? Indonesia is in discussion. It's proposed that Indonesia also might buy weapons from India, but at least 3 countries have bought weapons from India, from ASEAN region. So that makes the statement correct. So 1 and 3, option B becomes the right answer. Only 2 given statements are correct. Understood? Now let's start the next topic with a question. Instead of discussing the topic first, which makes it very easy for you to answer, let's start with a question. Let's see how many of you can get this right. And then I'll quickly discuss the topic. Read the question carefully. India recently participated for the first time in a diplomatic grouping involving France, Germany, and Poland. This was recently in the news, prominently reported by many newspapers. For the first time ever, we engaged diplomatically with this group, a trilateral that comprises of France, Germany, and Poland. The focus was on strengthening our political, security, and economic ties in Europe. So which grouping was this? Is it the Tri-Council of Europe, the Bonn Triad, the Weimar Triangle, or the Warsaw Pact? What's the correct answer? Very good. Many of them have answered correctly. It's option C, the Weimar Triangle. So it's a very small topic, but equally important, since India has engaged with this trilateral group for the first time ever. So what is the Weimar Triangle? When was it formed? What is its objective? Understanding these basic details can be important for the exam. So India's foreign minister met with his counterparts from France, Germany, and Poland. This grouping was established in 1991, in August 1991, right before the collapse of Soviet Union. I'm sure you must be aware that Europe was divided during the Cold War period between the Western democracies that were members of NATO aligned with the US and the Eastern Communist bloc under the Warsaw Pact led by Soviet Union and its communist allies. At one point, Poland was also a communist state. But by late 1980s, communism was declining and collapsing in Eastern Europe. Many countries, including Poland, they moved towards a democratic system, right? They were breaking away from the Warsaw Pact, from Soviet influence. And eventually, the Berlin Wall was brought down, which led to the reunification of Germany in 1989. And finally, the Soviet Union, USSR itself, disintegrated and collapsed. Correct? So as Poland underwent this democratic transition, it started reaching out to Germany. Germany, which had just been reunified. So there was a need to reconcile the people of Germany and Poland, to achieve reconciliation between the governments of Germany and Poland. Why? Because they had a bitter history going back to Second World War. Any student of history and international relations would be aware of what Hitler did in Poland. The brutal atrocities of Nazi Germany, right? Hitler invaded Poland, occupied Poland, committed brutal atrocities targeting Jews and other communities, leading to permanent damage to the society of Poland and the psyche of the people of Poland. So, after these changes took place by 1991, as Germany, Poland were trying to build a friendly relationship, it was essential to address the ghosts of the past, the horrors of the past, which was committed by Nazi Germany. So, this reconciliation was achieved by setting up the Weimar Triangle, and France was also added to the group. Why? Because France and Germany had achieved a similar reconciliation. Because Nazi Germany had attacked France as well, committed similar atrocities against the French people. But after the Second World War, France and Germany became allies, they became friends, at least West Germany. So this model was to be applied for German-Polish reconciliation with the help of France as a mediator of sorts. That was the primary objective of the Weimar Triangle. So since then, it has been a key grouping of Europe, a trilateral group, and India has officially engaged with this group for the first time. So that tells you that we are prioritizing East Europe in our foreign policy. That's why I feel this topic can be important. In the last 3 years, Prime Minister Modi has visited multiple countries in East Europe and central parts of Europe. From Croatia to Ukraine, Poland, PM Modi has covered multiple countries in this region, and we have had high level engagement going on with Central and East European countries. We are trying to bring back the focus on Eastern Europe, not only to increase our influence, but to find new markets for our exports, and also to counter China, which has already created a big influence for itself in Eastern Europe. So because of all these ongoing developments and the new trajectory of our foreign policy, East Europe can be a big priority for UPSC. So there can be a straightforward question on Weimar Triangle and its history, its objectives. Understood? Now let's move to the next topic. Again, we'll start with a question. India is exploring the idea of establishing a digital embassy or a data embassy in which country? This was also in the news. I'm sure you have heard of Indian embassy or an Indian high commission or an Indian consulate. But have you heard of something called a digital embassy or a data embassy? There is a proposal from India, and if everything goes well, very soon we will have our first ever data embassy in this country. Which country is it? Saptashati says B. Ankesh says it is C. Is it US, France, United Arab Emirates, or Israel? Okay. Many of them are saying France, but you're wrong. The correct answer is option C. It's the United Arab Emirates. India, UAE are exploring the idea of establishing the first ever data embassy between them. So I will explain what is a data embassy or a digital embassy, don't worry. But first, I want you to write down this important fact. The first country in the world to have set up a digital embassy or a data embassy is the Baltic state of Estonia. In 2017, Estonia became the first country in the world to set up a digital embassy in Luxembourg. Then in 2021, the small state of Monaco became the second country to set up a digital embassy in Luxembourg. Clear? So now India, UAE might set up similar digital embassies in each other's countries. So before we talk about digital embassy or data embassy, let's understand India-UAE relations, why it was in the news. There are a lot of related topics under this, and given the importance of UAE in our foreign policy, this topic again is extremely important. Because of the Iran war and the role of UAE in assisting India in energy security, in investments, and how our trade has been growing exponentially. This relationship, honestly, is one of the most important relationships for India. So earlier this year, the president of UAE carried out a very quick surprise visit to India, a whirlwind visit. He just came within few hours, conducted some important business, announced new deals and agreements and initiatives, and left. So this was a very surprise event of sorts. And Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed led this important delegation earlier this year where many important deals and agreements were announced. That's when there was a proposal from both sides that we should set up a digital embassy in each other's countries. So first we'll look at the outcomes of this visit of the UAE's president, and then I'll explain what is a digital embassy, what is a data embassy. See, India UAE, we have a free trade agreement, the CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, signed in 2022. UAE is India's one of India's largest trading partners. It's always in the top 3, or at least in the top 4. Usually, our top trading partner would be China, followed by the United States, or sometimes it can change. Sometimes in some years, US has been the number 1 trading partner, followed by China. Now, if we include an entire region, European Union comes at the 3rd place. But if we include only countries and exclude EU, after China, US, our biggest trading partner is United Arab Emirates. So if I take only countries into account without the EU, UAE is our 3rd biggest trading partner. Even if EU is included, it will still be the 4th largest trading partner of India. So that is the importance of this relationship, which has really grown in the last 15 to 20 years. So under the CEPA, we have given duty-free access. India's labor-based industries like textiles, apparels, gold, gems and jewelry, leather, they are really benefiting from this free trade agreement. And we have significantly increased our exports to the UAE. UAE also exports oil, gas, petrochemical products, and gold and other commodities to India. So with reduction of tariffs and elimination of most of the tariffs, giving duty-free access, the trade has already achieved the initial target of $100 billion. When the FTA was signed in 2022, their target was to achieve 100 billion bilateral trade by 2030, but we have achieved it by 2024-2025 itself. So now they have agreed to double the trade volume to 200 billion by 2032, which is a very ambitious goal they have set for themselves. Next, India UAE have decided to quickly implement some of the initiatives they have launched. The Bharat Mart initiative, Virtual Trade Corridor, and Bharat Africa Setu. There can be a question related to one of these. A direct question on what is Bharat Mart, or what is Bharat Africa Setu, or Virtual Trade Corridor between India and UAE. So you must be aware of these initiatives between India and UAE. Bharat Mart is essentially a marketplace. It's primarily an online marketplace where goods are sold at the wholesale level by producers, especially by MSME industry. But Bharat Mart is also setting up a physical warehouse, a physical facility in UAE to improve our trade, improve our exports towards Europe, West Asia, and Africa. So, under the Bharat Mart initiative, UAE will be a hub, a logistics hub from where Indian exports can be pushed across the world. Because see, UAE has some of the leading port facilities and logistics facilities. You might have heard of the Dubai port, Dubai Port International. It runs a separate logistics and operations arm called DP World, which is a very well-renowned organization owned by the Emirati family. So India has entered into a deal with DP World. DP World is a global leader in operational shipping operations and logistical operations. So it will help set up Bharat Mart, a physical warehouse and storage facility where Indian goods can be moved to UAE, and from there they can be shipped to Europe or to Africa or to West Asian countries. So DP World will provide the logistical support, to this marketplace led by the Indian government, which will mainly support MSME industries, which are export oriented industries. Clear? Now they want to quickly expedite and implement the Bharat Mart initiative. Now, what is this virtual trade corridor? India UAE have set up a tech based platform for seamless, paperless transactions to facilitate trade. They are using technology, that's why it's a virtual corridor. Even before Indian ships leave the Indian port, headed towards UAE's ports like Dubai, Al Fujairah, Sharjah, etc. All the required documentation, customs clearance, import duties, everything will get cleared through this online system, through the Maitri platform that India has established. The Maitri platform of India provides for a seamless integration, providing fast clearance for ships that are carrying the cargo. And this virtual trade corridor will ensure that all the legal paperwork, the immigration work, everything is cleared before the ship can arrive at UAE's ports. So this will speed up the transactions. It will speed up the cargo movement. Next, Bharat Africa Setu initiative. What is this? See, Africa is a key market. It's an unexplored market for Indian exports. And UAE can be the perfect hub to give a push for Indian products into Africa. So they all work together. Bharat Mart, then the Maitri platform and virtual trade corridor. They will align with the Bharat Africa Setu initiative, with UAE acting as the Setu, as the bridge. UAE will act as a bridge from where Indian exports, especially from MSME sector, can be pushed towards African markets. So this is a win-win situation. UAE can be like a gateway, like a launch board from where we can launch our exports into Africa. So these are new initiatives that were announced few months ago. Now we want to speed up the implementation, and that's why they are in the news. So please make a note. Next, recently India UAE have signed a civil nuclear deal. UAE is focusing on advanced technologies from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, space exploration, and as well as civil nuclear projects are a priority for the Emiratis. So, under the civil nuclear sector, we have signed a deal with UAE, and we are looking to collaborate under the small modular reactor projects. In the recent budget, India has given a big push for small modular reactors. Now, with the Shanti Act passed by the Parliament, we have liberalized the nuclear sector, which was monopolized with the public sector agencies. Now, private sector participation is allowed, foreign investments are allowed. So, this paves the way for India UAE to collaborate in the field of small modular reactors. Now, coming to digital or data embassies, what are these? When you look at a regular embassy, a diplomatic mission, it's as good as the sovereign territory of that country, right? And it even has diplomatic immunity. Now, for example, let's take the Indian embassy in Abu Dhabi, or Indian embassy in Washington, or the Indian embassy in Beijing. The physical facility that we have, or it could be the Indian High Commission in Islamabad, the physical embassy that we have is as good as Indian territory, where a country can exercise its sovereign rights. Like Pakistan can't interfere with Indian embassy or Indian High Commission in Islamabad. China can't interfere with the functioning of the Indian embassy in Beijing, right? This is protected under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, where diplomatic premises are granted sovereign rights, where local laws, regulations will not apply. Local police and security law enforcement agencies, they cannot exercise jurisdiction within diplomatic compounds and premises. This includes not just the embassy and consulates and high commissions, it will include the residential quarters of the diplomats. It will even include the diplomatic cars and vehicles, which are separately marked in diplomatic plates. They can't be stopped by the local police, they can't arrest the diplomats. So, this immunity is extended to your diplomatic premises so that your diplomats can function freely, without fear, without hesitation, without being threatened or intimidated. So, almost sovereign rights are extended to your diplomatic premises. Similarly, in case of a digital embassy or a data embassy, you are going to set up sovereign data centers in a foreign country. For example, an Indian data center located in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, which is as good as Indian sovereign territory with diplomatic immunity, where we will store some of our critical data and UAE or anyone else will not have access to it. Be it UAE's intelligence, their police, law enforcement agencies, or any other country's security and intelligence agencies. They cannot access these facilities. It will be limited to India, and only India can have access to the data embassies. Why will you set up these centers? It will basically help distribute the risk, right? If you place all the data centers in your own country, it could be prone to natural disasters. What if an earthquake destroys your data centers? Or what if war, conflict, geopolitical tensions damage your data centers? You need a redundancy, you need backup centers, right? Plus, it will help in seamless digital transactions. So, similarly, UAE will open a data center in India where we will accord the status of a digital embassy. So, Indian laws will not apply to UAE's data center if it is set up in our country as a digital embassy. So it's a new experiment we are trying out. Very few countries have done it. Countries like Estonia, Monaco, and others. So if India UAE go ahead, this would be one of the initial data embassies in the world, and this might become common in the future, where countries will distribute their data, store data in other countries where they have sovereign rights over that because it's a embassy of sorts. The data will be protected and local laws and jurisdiction will not apply on these data centers. Understood? So this is a new topic, a trending topic, which UPSC can pick up for a question. Now, few more developments that were in the news related to India UAE. India has given full support to UAE to host the 2026 UN Water Conference. The UN Water Conference is a global summit which plays a big role in water management. Given the threat posed by global warming, climate change, pollution, managing water, providing safe, clean drinking water is a core objective under Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Under SDG 6, providing clean, safe water for drinking and for other purposes is a primary target of Sustainable Development Goal number 6. So the UN Water Conference is being co-hosted by UAE and Senegal, the African country of Senegal. It will take place in December 2026. UAE will be hosting it. Senegal would be a co-host. So India has given full backing for this upcoming UN Water Conference. So please make a note. There can be a question related to UN Water Conference. Which country is hosting it, right? Or what SDG goal is it related to? Now coming to our security defense relations. UAE has become a key security partner for India in recent years, and we have multiple military exercises. So please make a note. We have a bilateral army exercise called Desert Cyclone, where Indian Army trains with UAE's army and special forces, focusing on counter-terrorism, urban warfare, subconventional warfare, etc. We have a naval exercise called Syed Talwar. That was the old name. Now it has recently been rechristened. It has been renamed as Exercise Gulf Waves. This is a naval exercise. And don't forget, India, UAE are essentially maritime neighbors of sorts, right? We share the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and Hormuz, where we both have equal interests. So, naval exercise Zayed Talwar has now been renamed as Exercise Gulf Waves. We also have a trilateral Air Force exercise called Desert Night, which includes France along with UAE and India. It's a recently launched trilateral air exercise. India, France, and UAE take part in Desert Night. Then Desert Flag. It's a very popular multinational air exercise hosted by UAE, and India is one of the participants. India is always invited. So UAE invites many of its close allies from US to Saudi Arabia and many other countries, and India is also a participant. Then we also host a multinational Air Force exercise called Tarang Shakti. The Indian Air Force organizes Tarang Shakti, a multilateral Air Force exercise where UAE is invited. along with other key allies and friends of India. So these are some important bilateral and multilateral exercises involving our armed forces. Now let's move towards the next topic. We'll start the topic with a question again, and I want you guys to answer this question. Consider the following with regard to Pax Silica initiative. It's a US-led initiative on AI and supply chain security. India is a founding member. All UN member states are eligible to join. What's the right answer? The Pax Silica initiative was recently in the news. India has joined the Pax Silica initiative, and we also hosted the AI Impact Summit, where we officially announced that we are signing uh, the Pax Silica initiative to become a member of this initiative. So, because of this reason, the topic is very important. But what's the correct answer? Some are saying A, but some are saying C, but majority are saying A. Okay, let's see what's the correct answer. First statement is correct. It is a US led initiative focused on AI and supply chain security. It's focused on critical emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. And it's focused on all related hardware and software that's related to AI, from semiconductor chip fabrication to critical minerals that are needed. So it focuses on creating secure, resilient supply chains where US will source these critical raw materials and products from trusted allies and trusted partners, or what we call as friend shoring. In geoeconomics, there is a term called friend shoring, where you source key materials, goods, and technologies from your close friends, from your trusted partners, so that your enemies cannot disrupt the supply chain. Since China controls most of the key supply chains, especially with regard to AI related technologies, semiconductor chips, silicon supplies, critical mineral supplies, this is a vulnerability for Western powers, especially the United States. You might have seen after Trump targeted China with tariffs, China very effectively used bans on critical mineral supplies to cripple the American tech industry, forcing Trump to back down and take a step back. So that shows the power China holds over global supply chains, right? So China is known to weaponize its economic dominance to gain strategic leverage. That's why US has launched this initiative called Pax Silica. Clear? But second statement is wrong. Though India has joined Pax Silica initiative as a member, we are not a founding member. This initiative was launched in December 2025. But India was not invited initially. So we are not a founding member. India was given the invite later in January 2026, and in Feb, when we hosted the AI Impact Summit, that's when India officially announced that it's joining Pax Silica initiative. So we are not a founding member. Third statement is also incorrect. Membership is not open to all UN member states. It's open to a select list of countries that are invited by the US. Because it's a US led initiative, it invites only closest partners, trusted partners, where they have similar strategic goals or ideological alignment. Only such select countries are invited to join this initiative, not all UN member states. So, correct answer is option A, one only. So, Pax Silica is a supply chain security initiative focused on artificial intelligence related technologies and supplies. The objective is to cover the entire stack of AI and the full supply chain, end to end supply chain of artificial intelligence and critical emerging technologies. So, from silicon supplies to other essential raw materials and critical minerals, from lithium to cobalt to nickel to copper, and as well as the key hardware and software and data logistics and data centers. It covers every spectrum of artificial intelligence. So, the objective is to reduce dependency on coercive partners like China, right? China, which is known to weaponize the trade advantage and the control it has over supply chains, is essentially a threat for the global economy. And hence, it seeks to create independence or resilience of sorts so that supply chains can become self reliant without being dependent on China controlled supply chains. It will also protect sensitive technologies, right? Because if you depend on one major power which is hostile to you, it will create a cybersecurity risk. Chinese companies are known to misuse the dominance they have. They are known to have close links with Chinese state security, the Ministry of State Security, which is Chinese intelligence, and the People's Liberation Army. And they're known to install security backdoors in the military hardware and software, and even in civilian hardware and software, through which they can gain access to your networks and hack into your networks. So, this is a major cybersecurity risk through which China can not only steal data, classified information, it can even wage cyber war against your country. So, this remains a serious threat. So, addressing these challenges remains the focus and priority of the Pax Silica initiative. Now, which countries have signed and become members of Pax Silica? Please take a look, make a note of this. Australia, Finland, Greece, India, Israel, Japan, Qatar, South Korea, Singapore, Sweden, Philippines, UAE, and United Kingdom. As you can see, each country which has signed the initiative, they bring something unique to this platform. The US is a global leader in AI. It has technology, it has money, right? It has massive capital and it controls the big tech. Countries like Australia, it's a leading AI power. More importantly, it has vast resources of critical minerals. Australia is known to have one of the largest reserves of critical minerals, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. Finland, Greece, from Europe, even Sweden, they are also technology leaders, right? Then India has been added. It's one of the few developing nations in the group. We stand out as a odd man in this group. So there's concern as well that probably they're just looking to use India's human resource and markets. Because see, that is what India can offer. We are neither a leading AI power like US or China, nor we have capital, right? Though we are putting our efforts, we have a India AI mission. We are pumping some money into AI innovation, but it's nowhere compared to what other countries are doing. So what India can bring here is primarily the market size and its human resource, the talented, skilled workforce. Israel is a AI leader. Japan is a AI and tech leader. Qatar, it is sitting on petrodollars. It has massive wealth that can be invested. South Korea is a technology giant. It's a leading semiconductor fabricator. Singapore as well leads in semiconductor chips, AI, and it's a financial hub. Same with UK. UK is also a financial hub and it can bring in technology in the field of AI. United Arab Emirates is also emerging as a tech leader with massive capital being present. Then Philippines is also another odd man, but it does have manufacturing potential. Philippines is a leading manufacturer where many tech factories, electronic manufacturing takes place. Right? So these members are part of it. There are non-signatory participants like Taiwan. And if you observe, all the Chip 4 or Fab 4 countries are part of it. The Chip 4 or Fab 4 is an alliance. Alliance including US, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The four leading manufacturers of semiconductor chips, right? They are part of this alliance called Chip 4 or Fab 4 alliance. So all the four are part of it. Even Netherlands, Canada, EU, and OECD took part in the negotiations as guests or observer nations, but they did not sign and they did not become members of Pax Silica. They're only guest states or observer states. Canada has differences with the US, especially with Trump's policies, right? And Netherlands right now has a monopoly over lithography machines. Without lithography machines, you can't manufacture the GPUs, the graphic processing units, be it companies like Nvidia or Qualcomm, Broadcom, or any chip manufacturer today. They can't produce the GPUs for AI computing without Netherlands. There's only one company in the world, which is a Dutch company. They alone have the lithography machines which can basically manufacture the GPUs, right? So it has stayed out. It wants to retain that monopolistic control. It will only participate as a guest, as an observer, but not as a signatory. So please remember these basic facts with regard to Pax Silica. Next topic, a very important report was in the news, the Global Risk Report. Can you tell me which organization or which institution publishes the Global Risk Report? Who publishes the Global Risk Report? Is it the IMF or the World Bank or World Economic Forum or the OECD? What's the correct answer? Because see, the findings of Global Risk Report is quite shocking. It is quite enlightening regarding what kind of risks are present for the global economy and global stability. So, which institution publishes this famous and popular report called Global Risk Report? Very good. Many of them are saying option C. It is the World Economic Forum, the WEF, which is held every year at Davos in Switzerland, right before the WEF takes place at Davos. Before that, this report is published, the Global Risk Report. It basically highlights the biggest risks that are present for the global economy. Anything that can destabilize the global order, anything that can affect global stability, will have a cascading economic effect, right? It could be climate change, it could be loss of biodiversity, it could be geopolitical tensions, wars, terrorism. Those risks are identified and quantified under this report. So it's like a indicator for policymakers, for governments, for central banks, for private investors to understand the risks that are present in the global economy today. That's why this report is very important. And the 2026 report, it's the 21st edition of this report. It has been publishing this report from 2009 onwards, from 2010. So the World Economic Forum believes that in the current year, the biggest risk for global economy would be geo-economic confrontation. Geo-economic confrontation has been rated as the highest risk for the global economy. So what do you mean by geo-economic confrontation? There can be a conceptual question, a conceptual IR question related to geo-economics or what is geo-economic confrontation. This refers to coercive trade policies. It refers to weaponization of trade, like what Trump has done, what China has done. So Trump's tariffs, the mindless tariffs he kept on announcing, 50% on India, 150% on China, right? And he targeted even the closest allies of United States, from Canada to Mexico to European NATO allies were targeted. So this became one of the biggest disruptors for the global economy last year. And along with that, the policies of countries like China, which uses the monopoly over the supply chains, it places the bans on export of rare earth magnets. The global auto industry, tech industry, electronics industry, they were crippled for many months as China restricted the export of rare earth magnets. China placed restrictions on export of critical raw materials, including critical minerals. So this tit for tat policy, where geopolitics and geopolitical rivalries are leading to weaponization of trade, weaponization of economic policies, this represents the biggest risk for global economy and stability, according to the World Economic Forum. Apart from geo-economic confrontation, state-based armed conflicts, where state actors are getting into more wars and conflicts, be it Russian invasion of Ukraine, Israel's aggression across West Asia, from Gaza to Lebanon to Yemen or even Iran, or US military aggression against Venezuela, against Iran, the state based armed conflicts that are going on, the various wars in Africa, they represent a major risk factor. Then extreme weather events, the increasing frequency, intensity of disasters driven by global warming and climate change, rising societal polarization across the world. You see an increasingly divided world, especially because of social media, where a lot of fake news, misinformation is being spread, increasing the divisions on the lines of religion, ethnicity, race. Look at the anti immigration hate. Look at the hate that has been developed against Asians or Africans or Muslims or Latinos, especially the promotion of white supremacist radical extremist views and ideologies. This represents one of the biggest threats for global economy and global stability. With regard to India, the report has identified these risk factors, and I want you to make a note. UPSC might ask you, according to Global Risk Report of World Economic Forum, which are the biggest risks for India that have been identified? This can be a question that can be given. Cyber insecurity. India is many steps behind when it comes to cyber security. Right? India has been a victim of major cyber attacks, cyber fraud, where precious data has been stolen, sensitive operations have been taken over remotely, and this represents the biggest risk, be it our public critical infrastructure or even the private companies. They do not really focus on the culture of cyber safety and cyber security. And with advances in AI, with emergence of new malware and new tools, Indian cyberspace is all the more vulnerable. India's critical information infrastructure can be easily crippled by hostile threat actors. You not only have state sponsored cyber actors, you have non state cyber actors as well, who work as proxies for countries like China, Pakistan, and others. So, cyber insecurity is one of the biggest risks for the Indian economy. Then, the rampant inequality, the income divide in the country, the difference between the haves and the have nots, where 1% are ultra rich, ultra wealthy, with remaining 99% barely having any wealth or any control over resources. This represents the next big risk, followed by the lack of public services and social protection, the poor investments in education, the poor infrastructure, the poor quality of roads, the lack of power and electricity in India, the lack of public health care, the inefficiency and the insufficiency of public services offered by the government and social protection, which is also offered by your government. So these are identified by World Economic Forum as the biggest risks for India. Next topic, the third path doctrine was in the news. Have you heard about this? Which global leader, which global leader, a head of state or head of government, came out with the third path doctrine? Was it Donald Trump? Do you think Donald Trump has the intellectual capacity to come out with new doctrines and theories in political science and foreign policy? Is it Xi Jinping? Is it Mark Carney of Canada? Or is it Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Who recently coined this new path for global diplomacy, for multilateralism? It's called the third path doctrine. I'll give you one hint. This leader delivered a very powerful speech where he openly criticized the breakdown and violation of international rules. He took direct aim at leaders like Trump, Xi Jinping, and others. He bravely called them out, and he basically suggested a new path for middle powers. Middle powers like India and other European countries, if they can come together, right? He suggested that we can deliver better results for the world, because these big superpowers are acting like hegemons. The US is acting like a bully. China has always been acting like a bully. So he made a very powerful speech where he coined the third path doctrine. Very good. It is option C, Mark Carney. The Canadian Prime Minister made this historic speech at Davos at the World Economic Forum. As we have been discussing, US has blatantly targeted Canada. Right? Trump keeps on saying that Canada is not even a sovereign country. He calls it the 51st state of the US. I mean, look at the audacity of this. Canada is such a massive country, right? Saying that it's just another state of the US, threatening Canada with tariffs, trying to bully a neighbor. That is not what you expect from friends and partners. But under Donald Trump, anything and everything is possible, right? So the Canadian PM, he stood his ground because this was about the self respect of Canadians, the pride of the nation. At one point, you have to keep aside the economic consequences or the geopolitical consequences and stand up for what is right. That's why Mark Carney got so much praise, so much acclaim with regard to his open speech, where he did not mince his words. He bravely pointed out that leaders like Trump, Xi Jinping, countries like US and China, they are ruining the world. They're destroying the world as we know because they're disrespecting international rules. They're breaking partnerships and alliances. So, in this powerful speech, he called for a third path where rules based order can still be protected. But this can be done only if middle powers come together. Only if middle powers show the guts to speak openly and oppose the neo colonial policies of Trump and Xi Jinping. What these big powers are doing is basically a return of colonialism, a return of authoritarianism, where sovereignty is taken for granted, where other countries, territories, and resources are being taken away, where war has become the normal path. And this includes even Russia and Israel. Even they are on the same path. So this speech, it is seen as a pivotal moment in contemporary geopolitics by strategic experts and political science experts. That's why UPSC might ask a question on what is the third path doctrine. It's also being called the Carney doctrine. So, under the Carney doctrine, he suggested if middle powers come together, India, France, Australia, or United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Canada, these are the middle powers, Japan as well. Those who are affected by the hegemonic policies of these bullies, if they can work on value based realism, this again is a core concept in political science and IR. Realism is about adopting a pragmatic, realistic foreign policy, but based on values, where you can create small mini laterals that are specific to certain issues or certain sectors, and countries which share similar values can be included in these mini laterals to try and protect a rules based system, to try and protect multilateralism. See, this is a war between multilateralism and unilateralism. Leaders like Trump and Xi Jinping, they are trying to push the world towards a unilateral world. They want a world where only their country, their government, their leadership would be the most dominant. That's what Trump wants, that's what Xi Jinping wants. That's why US has quit so many international organizations, so many multilateral initiatives. So Mark Carney is acknowledging that multilateralism through UN has failed. UN may not work, UN is not effective. But instead, he is suggesting value-based realism through cooperation of middle powers. And he used the term variable geometry. What is variable geometry? It refers to creation of multiple minilateral groups. Maybe one small group on climate change. Maybe India, France, Canada, for example. Right? We have similar values, similar concerns and objectives. Maybe India, France, and Canada can work together on climate change issues. India, Japan, and let's say UK. Maybe we can work together in the field of artificial intelligence. So creating such small groups is the meaning behind variable geometry, where different set of countries, 3, 4, 5 countries will come together and they will try to create a rules-based order to uphold international rules. So this can be a counter to the hegemonic policies of Trump, Xi Jinping, and other such leaders, which includes Putin and Netanyahu as well. Right? So this is the third path or the Carney doctrine. Let's move to the next topic. In this session, I'll be covering a lot of security, defense related topics as well, not just IR topics. Because see, UPSC has been asking some questions from security and defense. So we can't ignore that. So there were some important developments in the field of security and defense. What is the unique highlight of Coast Guard vessel ICGS Samudra Pratab that was recently commissioned? Indian Coast Guard ship Samudra Pratab was recently inducted into the Indian Coast Guard. What is its unique highlight? What is its unique feature? Is it the first Coast Guard vessel equipped with submarine hunting capabilities? Is it India's first icebreaker which will be deployed in the Arctic to clear up the ice, to open up the shipping routes? Is it India's first indigenously designed pollution control vessel? Or will it lead India's first deep sea mining mission in the Indian Ocean? This topic was widely reported through a PIB press release from Defense Ministry and as well as from other related ministries and departments of the government. Not many newspapers picked up on it. That's why I'm bringing this topic into the discussion today. Many of them are saying option C. Very good. C is the right answer. This is the first dedicated pollution control vessel of India. Not just for the Coast Guard. This is our first ever vessel dedicated for fighting pollution, marine pollution. Because see, if you look at the mandate of the Indian Coast Guard, many of them, they assume that Coast Guard is only for defense and security of the country. That's not the case. Coast Guard has a very wide mandate. Of course, Coast Guard is involved in defense and security. It acts as a second line of defense, backing up the Indian Navy, right? It mainly protects your exclusive economic zone, or economic installations, offshore installations. It also works with coastal police for coastal security. It tackles organized crime, piracy, etc. Right? Apart from the security role, the maritime security role, it is also involved in scientific research. It is involved in oceanic research. It is involved in environment protection to protect coral reefs, mangroves, to protect the marine food chains and ecosystems. And it is the designated nodal authority to fight oil spills. If an oil spill occurs in Indian waters within India's EEZ, it is the Indian Coast Guard which is the nodal authority to contain and deal with oil spills. Is that clear? So it has an environmental role as well, along with a scientific and security and defense role. So this is the first indigenously designed and constructed pollution control vessel. And also, it is the largest ship in the entire fleet of the Indian Coast Guard. The largest ever built by Goa Shipyard Limited. It has specialist equipment to deal with oil spills and any other form of marine pollution. It carries specialist oil skimmers, flotation buoys through which oil spills can be contained physically. Then it will deploy chemical and bioremediation agents to break up the oil globules so that it will sink to the bottom of the sea floor. Because if it washes up on the coastline, that is detrimental to marine life. It can destroy coral reefs, the marine life, and the mangroves. So it is equipped with all the specialist equipment and chemical and bio reagents for remediation efforts to contain oil spill. It also can take up surveillance missions, it can take up search and rescue operations if required. But primary purpose is environment protection, biodiversity conservation. So this is our first major pollution control vessel. It even has firefighting capabilities. If let's say a ship catches fire, right? It can be deployed for firefighting and search and rescue operations. So that is the uniqueness of this Coast Guard vessel called Samudra Pratab. Next, another security related development. The military quantum mission policy framework was announced by the Chief of Defense Staff. The CDS is the highest ranking military officer in India. The Chief of Defense Staff, Anil Chauhan, released this policy document, right? So this basically lays a path to focus on quantum computing and leverage quantum computing in Indian armed forces for India's defense and national security. So quantum computing is one of the critical emerging technologies, just like artificial intelligence. In quantum computing, you can exponentially scale up the speed of computing because of the very nature of the quantum world, how qubits will function. They can exponentially increase the compute capacity compared to your traditional computers, your traditional bits, how they operate. In a traditional computer, traditional bits can hold either 0 or 1, right? And in comparison, qubits, they exist in quantum superposition where they can hold multiple states simultaneously. It can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. And it entirely depends on the observer. So this unique ability that you find in the quantum world, it can exponentially increase the quantum capabilities, the computing capabilities. So this can lead to groundbreaking advances in communication technology. It can provide utmost secure communication. It can render existing cryptography useless. With such speeds of computing, all your existing supercomputers will go useless, and the traditional cryptography which is there, traditional encryption, all the codes can be broken. Right now, traditional computers, even supercomputers, will take years, decades, or centuries to break existing encryption keys. But a quantum computer can solve those mathematical problems in seconds or minutes or days, which means no system can be safe anymore. Right? Existing encryption cryptography will become completely obsolete, and it will pave the path for new communication, completely secure communication, at the same time creating a threat for existing encryption and communication. So this has direct military application, right? All leading powers are working on it. China, US, European powers, Israel, India as well. So it aligns with the national quantum mission. Just like we have an India AI mission for artificial intelligence, we have a national quantum mission under which the government is investing in quantum research and quantum computing. And there are four key pillars in quantum research. Please make a note of this. There are four important pillars of quantum research. One is quantum computing, quantum communication, quantum sensing and metrology, quantum materials and devices. These four pillars are prioritized under the military quantum mission policy framework, where all the armed forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, they will also invest in quantum research in these four areas. And they will integrate quantum technologies into military applications. Clear? Next, now we come to two major topics that were in the news, two important FTAs. The India-New Zealand FTA, which was signed just today, and India-European Union FTA, the mother of all trade agreements. Let's cover these two big topics, and after that, we have few more small topics to wrap up the session. So let's start with a question. The India-New Zealand FTA. Consider these three statements. With its signing, India now has an FTA with all RCEP countries. Is it correct? To answer this, you should know what is RCEP, which are the RCEP countries, and do we have a FTA with all the RCEP countries or not? It is one of the fastest negotiated trade agreements that India has entered into. It will provide India with immediate duty-free access on 100% of tariff lines. Which of the statements is or are correct? Nikki Kaushal, Nikki Kushwaha, and others are saying it is C. But Devendra Kumar and others are saying it is B. Okay, let's check one by one. With its signing, India now has an FTA with all RCEP countries. This is incorrect. So, what is RCEP? It's a free trade agreement, one of the world's largest FTA, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The RCEP is a China-led free trade agreement involving all the ASEAN countries. All the 11 ASEAN countries are part of it. China is the leader of RCEP, along with Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. These are your RCEP nations. India was also part of RCEP talks, but in 2019, India quit the RCEP negotiations. Since India's concerns were not being addressed, we had major issues with a China-led FTA, plus many of them were developed industrialized countries. We were worried that foreign imports would flood Indian markets. Indian domestic producers like farmers, MSME sector would be hit, and our trade deficit would increase. Because of all the concerns, plus the fear of China flooding goods into the Indian market, it led India to quit RCEP. Now, when you look at RCEP members, do we have FTA with all of them? Let's check. India has a FTA with ASEAN. There is a India-ASEAN free trade agreement. We even have FTA with Malaysia and a few others. India, Japan, they have a free trade agreement. There is a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. With South Korea as well, we have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement signed back in 2009 under the then Monroe and Donroe government. Recently, with Australia in 2022, we have signed the ECTA, Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. And now we have a FTA with New Zealand as well. So though we have FTA with all these countries, we do not have FTA with China. India-China FTA is impossible to think of, right? Basic common sense. So if you know what is RCEP, then you can easily answer this question. There's no way India will have a FTA with China. So statement one is wrong. But we do have FTA with everyone else within RCEP. Please remember the fact. It's one of the fastest negotiated trade agreements that India has entered into. This is absolutely correct. The negotiations began last year, I think March 2025. Within 8 or 9 months, we had finalized the FTA by December 2025. This is the quickest, the fastest FTA that we have ever negotiated. Some FTAs take months and years together. Look at the India-EU FTA. We started talks in 2007. It took us 19 years almost to finalize the FTA with European Union. Right? Though there was a break in between, there are FTAs which take years and years of negotiations. But the FTA with New Zealand is the fastest ever negotiated for India. So 2 is correct. 3 is also correct. It provides 100% duty-free elimination on all the tariff lines with immediate effect. Right? And today it has been signed. It was announced in Jan or Feb, I think. And just today, 27th of April, both countries have signed the FTA and very soon it will take effect. And once it goes into effect, we will get duty-free access on 100% of tariff lines. That is 8,000 plus exports of India to New Zealand will become duty-free. So 2 and 3 are correct. Option C is the right answer. Now, there are many unique things about this FTA. For example, it was the fastest negotiated trade agreement for India. Now we have a FTA with all RCEP countries except for China. And what's even more unique, it was negotiated by a women-led team on both the sides. All women-led negotiators on both sides. That is another uniqueness about this free trade agreement. Now, what does India gain? What does New Zealand gain? These basic facts can also be relevant. Right? Generally, you don't have to go into such depth, but you never know. UPSC can be unpredictable. It can surprise you by asking very specific pointed questions. As I told you, India will enjoy the immediate benefits. Once it kicks into effect, now that we have signed it today, right? Once it takes effect, India will get duty-free access on 100% of its exports. Clear? In return, we will open up 70% of tariff lines for New Zealand's exports into India that roughly covers 95% of what we import from New Zealand. So it's a quid pro quo with India getting slightly better benefits. And it is designed to benefit labor intensive industries and export oriented industries. This is always India's priority because see, one of India's biggest challenge is to create more employment, create more jobs. So driving exports in labor oriented sectors will automatically create more jobs. So for example, sectors like leather, footwear, furniture, gems and jewelry, right? Textiles and apparels. These are sectors where India is not only having a leading position, but we have a lot of micro, small, medium enterprises which are export oriented units. And they employ thousands and lakhs of people. Each factory, each industry will employ thousands of people. The moment you increase exports for them, they will employ more people, creating more jobs. So in all FTAs that we negotiate, our focus is to benefit labor intensive industries and export oriented industries. So these sectors will primarily benefit from leather, textile and apparels to ceramics, carpets, auto components. They will be the primary beneficiaries on the Indian side. At the same time, we have certain sensitive sectors and industries. Because see, New Zealand is a developed economy with superior agricultural output. And especially in dairy and meat industry, New Zealand is a global leader. So there's no way Indian farmers, Indian rural communities can compete with New Zealand's milk or cheese or meat. So India has carved out an exception, protecting the sensitive sectors like all dairy products, some selected animal products, even vegetables, gems and jewelry, aluminum, which are key industries of India, they receive protection. The tariffs will remain here. These sectors will not be opened up. And that's how India is protecting some of the sensitive sectors. Next, another important provision of the FTA is that New Zealand has taken up an investment commitment. It has committed to invest $20 billion over the next 15 years. This is similar to the FTA we signed in 2024 with EFTA countries, the European Free Trade Association. The EFTA, which has countries like Norway, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and Iceland, right? With these countries, the EFTA that we have signed also carries an investment guarantee of $100 billion. A similar investment commitment is present here as well. New Zealand, as a developed nation, will promise to bring $20 billion worth investments into India. Then there are provisions related to services sector and as well as for students and professionals, because a lot of Indian students study in New Zealand, a lot of Indian professionals work in New Zealand. So they face visa related problems and other mobility related issues, immigration related issues. They are also being sorted through this free trade agreement. It gives access to our IT, banking, and other service based industries. Plus, it will provide work opportunities where Indian students can work up to 20 hours per week as they are studying so they can earn some income to sustain themselves. They get relaxed post study work visas. Many countries have become very strict about migration, right? And they have very strict norms when it comes to transforming from a student visa to a professional work visa. They don't get enough time, and they have these high salary thresholds which many students may not meet, and that will force them to come back to India, and they would have taken big loans to go and study in these countries, right? So that's why India wants to protect such students by convincing the other country to give extended work visas or allowing them to work parallelly for more hours a week so they can earn some money which they can save for their day-to-day expenses or to pay off their loans. So this will benefit Indian students. It will facilitate work visas for skilled Indians, including Ayush practitioners. Now, this is a new feature in our trade negotiations. We are promoting opportunities for Ayush practitioners, for yoga trainers, for Ayurveda doctors, etc. We are creating opportunities abroad because, see, in other countries, Ayush practitioners are not legally recognized, right? So they may have a big Indian community who follow traditional medicine, who uh, basically depend on Ayurvedic treatment or homeopathy or even Unani and Siddha. So through trade agreements, now we are creating an opportunity where Ayush practitioners will be legally recognized to offer services in these countries. And many such opportunities are being opened up in services sector for IT, education, healthcare, and engineering. These are some standout features of this trade agreement. Please remember them. There can be a question related to it. Because in the past 4 years, I think we have signed 8 FTAs, starting with United Arab Emirates in 2022, then with Australia again in 2022. Then we signed a FTA with Mauritius in in the same period, roughly in the same period. And we have signed a FTA with Oman, with New Zealand and European Union, right? With EFTA as well. So multiple FTAs happening in the last few years, and that makes this topic very, very important. Now, coming to the mother of all trade agreements, the mother of all deals, as it was labeled, the India EU FTA, announced at the 16th India EU Summit. Now, this is a slightly bigger topic. I would take probably 8 to 10 minutes to discuss this, but trust me, it's totally worth it. It's a high expected topic to be asked as a question in this year's prelims. So let's look at some of the key features, the problems and concerns and challenges. You can even get a factual direct question or maybe a slightly deeper conceptual question. So the negotiations for this FTA began way back in 2007, as I told you. It continued for a few years until 2013, and after that it was suspended. Because India EU, we were not on the same page. We had a lot of differences. Especially EU, it's a developed region, right? All the countries, the members of EU, the 27 member states, they're all in the very high development category. 26 out of 27 members, they have very high HDI, which means they are developed countries with industrialized development. Whereas a developing nation like India can't match the standards and expectations and regulations of a developed market. They expect very high quality standards, hygiene standards, sanitary, phytosanitary measures. especially with regard to agricultural exports or pharmaceutical exports. So this creates hurdles or non-tariff barriers, as we call it, which affects Indian exporters, right? They expect very high standards of intellectual property rights to be enforced. They expect very high labor standards or environmental standards to be enforced, which a developing nation like India can't implement because that will increase the cost for our producers and they can't compete with European manufacturers. So that is why we had a lot of differences. The EU would expect India to implement strict IP regime, and we can never align with the IP laws of developed nations. With regard to sanitary, phytosanitary, and quality control standards, hygiene measures, a developing nation cannot meet the higher standards of developed countries. So, because of all the differences, the persisting issues, the talks were completely suspended in 2013. It was resumed nearly a decade later in 2022, and the talks again continued for nearly 4 years. Now, thanks to Donald Trump and his trade policies, his tariff wars, it pushed India EU to finally work out the deal and announce the deal. Because Trump's tariffs has not only affected India, but it has hit European countries as well, right? So the EU is looking to diversify its trade and investments, and same with India. So common objectives of India EU has driven them to work out the deal, and the policies of Trump has added more urgency to these talks. So that's one of the good outcomes of Trump's erratic policies. Now, why is it called the mother of all trade deals? That's purely because of the size of this agreement, the size of the two economies. I mean, look at the size of the Indian economy and look at the size of the European economy. It's massive. I mean, if you take the market size, the combined market size of India EU is estimated at $24 trillion. Look at the bilateral trade volume. Right now, our bilateral trade is above $135 billion every year, making the EU our top three trade partner, as I told you earlier. After China, US, EU is our top three trading partner, right? If I take the region into account. If we exclude the region, then UAE is the top three trading partner. So we have a massive trade volume of $135 billion. India has exports worth nearly 75 billion headed towards the European market. So it's a critical market for Indian farmers, for Indian textile garment industry, for Indian pharma industry, for Indian IT industry. We also trade in services to the tune of $85 billion, which is critical for the services industry on both sides. Then EU, don't forget, it's a big investor. It brings a lot of capital into the Indian market in the form of FDI and also in the form of institutional investment into the capital markets. So no wonder this deal has been labeled as the mother of all trade deals. Now let's see what India stands to gain and what we are offering in return and what are the concerns that remain. The EU has committed to eliminate all duties, giving duty-free access for 70% of tariff lines. So roughly 90% of our export value will get duty-free access after the deal goes into implementation. See, right now we've just announced the deal and signed the initial version of the deal, but there is still a long process to be followed before it becomes effective and implemented. Once implemented, EU will give duty-free access, that is zero duty access, on 70% of tariff lines covering nearly 90% of our export value. Then, over a period of 3 to 5 years after implementation, another 3% of our export value will see tariff elimination. So total of nearly 94% of our export value will become duty-free in a period of 3 to 5 years. The remaining 6% of our export value will see a tariff reduction. Is that clear? So it's a very staggered tariff reduction which is being provided. For some set of goods, there is immediate zero duty access being given. For some of them, it is implemented over 3 to 5 year period where duties are eliminated to zero. But in some sectors, duties will remain, but it will be reduced. Right now, in some sectors, Indian exports face tariffs of 26, 30, 40%. That will come down probably to 10%. So it's not complete duty-free access. Selected goods will get immediate duty-free access. Some of them will get it over 3 to 5 years. And in some sectors, duties will remain, but it will be reduced. So together, 99% of our export value will benefit. Nearly 99% of our exports in value terms, right? 94% of it will get zero duty access and remaining 6% roughly will get reduced tariff access. So this will be a big boost for Indian exports. According to estimates, we can even double our trade to the EU within a decade. So labor-oriented industries, export-focused industries are the biggest beneficiaries. Gems and jewelry, pharma, textiles, apparels, then ceramics, carpets, leather, footwear, furniture, they will all immensely benefit. Even the marine sector, especially because the US market has posed a big challenge for India because of the 50% tariffs. Though India-US announced a trade deal, it has never been signed. And there is still a lot of confusion as to what will happen between India-US. Right now, a 10% flat tariff remains, though the US Supreme Court has struck it down. The US Supreme Court has struck down all the Trump tariffs that were levied. And now there is a baseline 10% tariff on all imports into the US. But the uncertainty has killed many Indian industries and export-oriented sectors. For example, India's shrimp exports, especially for Andhra Pradesh, it was critical to export the shrimp to the US market, which has completely collapsed. Then if you take textiles in Tamil Nadu, right? US was a big market for them and many factories have shut because of Trump's policies, right? Same with Agra, known for local industries from furniture to footwear. They have taken a massive hit as US was one of their biggest markets. So now we can diversify into Europe. Once the deal comes into effect, which may take some months or maybe a few years as well, depends on how the process goes, but it'll help India diversify the exports and capitalize on the opportunities that are present. So the deal not only covers goods and commodities, it covers services, students, and professionals as well. It will open up opportunities for Ayush practitioners. Traditional medicinal services will receive a big benefit, right? The same provision that you see with New Zealand has been implemented here as well. And don't forget, in Europe, we have a very big Indian community from UK to France to Italy. Lakhs of Indians, they believe in traditional medicinal systems, right? Especially Ayurveda and homeopathy. So these practitioners will now officially be recognized because previously in other countries, Ayush and homeopathy practitioners would not be recognized as doctors. But now they can extend their services. This can increase our exports from Ayush industry, which can benefit indigenous tribes and local communities. Then dedicated social security agreements to facilitate easy access and mobility for Indian students with liberalized post-work visas and reduced salary threshold for transitioning into a work visa. So this will benefit our services industry, especially India's IT exports depends heavily on the European market. So all professional services sectors will gain to benefit because of the liberalized immigration and visa policies. So in return, what is India offering? Look at this. India will initially open up nearly 50%, 49 to 50% of its tariff lines, covering 30% of the export value. 30% of what Europe is exporting to India will become duty-free from day one, which means we are restricting the access slowly, gradually. Then another 39 to 40% of tariff lines will be opened up, covering 63% of the trade value, where duty-free access will be given over a staggered time period, over 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. Like in automobile sector, luxury cars of Europe can enter India, but there is a quota system which will be created and slowly, gradually, the cars can flow into India. So a similar arrangement is there with the UK FTA that was also signed last year, right? It will benefit the luxury car segment of Europe to bring their cars into India, but there is a certain limit and a staggered implementation which is given. Then for remaining goods, We will only reduce the tariffs, but will not give duty-free access. So cumulatively, if you take everything together, 97.5% of what EU exports to India will benefit from the tariff elimination and reduction. So easily the trade volume can double with such reduction of tariffs. But of course, both sides are keeping sensitive sectors out. For India, it is of course agriculture, animal husbandry, and few other sectors, including vegetables, fruits, etc. Even the EU is keeping out few sectors because India does have an advantage in case of certain meats and certain dairy products. So these sectors, which are also sensitive for the European market and European farmers, they are protected. Now, however, there are some concerns, and there can be a question related to this. See, there are few challenges which are still present. Maybe there will be a proper conceptual question based on the concerns of India-EU FTA. First of all, it's very difficult to implement the trade agreement. Why? Because see, the European Union has a process which needs to be followed. Now, the EU is not one entity. There are multiple organs. There are different organs within the EU, like how United Nations has different organs. The EU is also made up of different organs. Now, the deal that we have negotiated is with the European Commission. The European Commission is like the executive arm of EU. It's like the government of EU, the secretariat of EU, like how UN has a secretariat which handles all the official functions, the executive functions. That is handled by the European Commission. So when we negotiated with EU, it was with European Commission, which is a primary organ of EU. So now the deal has been signed between India and the European Commission. Now, the document has to be translated into all the European languages of all the European states, from German to French to Italian to all the languages. And it has to be eventually approved by the European Parliament. So a legislative process has to be followed, which itself is a time-consuming task. It can't happen within few weeks. It will take at least few months or maybe even a year or more as well. So it's a very long, lengthy, arduous process. This is one of the limitations. It will not take immediate effect. Second, the EU has an environmental tax, a sort of green carbon tax called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Through this, the EU levies higher tariffs on imports from other countries depending on their carbon footprint, depending on the emissions. Now, let's say Indian steel factory is exporting steel or aluminum to European market. Now, that factory in India would have contributed some emissions. They would have certain carbon footprint. Depending on that, EU would impose extra taxes, extra tariffs, so that it becomes a restriction which will force other countries and industries in other countries to focus on emission reductions. Now, this is a problem for India. India opposes the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Because see, environmental issues, climate change should be dealt only with UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is the platform to handle climate change issues, right? Where the principle of equity is applied, where a distinction is created between developed countries and developing countries like India. But the EU is imposing this on its own unilaterally. This will hit every developing country. It will hit our factories and industries, and they will be expected to match the emission standards of European countries. If they can't match, if they exceed the emission threshold, they will pay higher tariffs, higher taxes on their products, which will make them uncompetitive, or they can't compete with the European market in that case. So this remains a concern. The trade agreement doesn't deal with this. The EU has refused to give exemption to India, saying that it doesn't give exemption to anyone else. But however, there is one safety clause. If at all EU someday gives an exemption to someone else, the same exemption will automatically apply to India. If someday, imagine the EU exempts a country from carbon border adjustment mechanism, automatically it will apply to Indian exports as well. But it's highly unlikely to happen. So this remains a challenge for us. Next, rules of origin requirement is complex. What do you mean by rules of origin? See, FTA is meant to benefit only the two parties involved, right? India and EU, only they should benefit. Only their manufacturers have to benefit. Like India, New Zealand. When you take that FTA, only Indian producers, Indian manufacturers and producers from New Zealand, they have to take the benefit of this. What if a third country, right, a exporter or a producer from a third country tries to abuse this trade route, especially from China? Chinese producers, exporters are known to use the FTA between other countries to try and dump their goods. That's why rules of origin requirement is important, where there is a minimum threshold prescribed for value addition. See, in today's globalized world, a product will be produced in different countries throughout the assembly line. But eventually, when FTA benefits have to be taken, the exporter will have to prove that minimum value addition was done in the concerned country. Only those goods will be eligible for FTA benefits. If someone is bringing goods from China, simply repackaging it to take the benefit of FTA to dump the goods on India, those goods will not be eligible. But however, the entire process, which is based on verification and licensing, it's very complicated, and this could become a deterrent. Then data security barrier. See, the EU has very strict data protection norms under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So this could become a punishment for Indian tech companies because India has not been given any exemption. We are not recognized as a data secure territory. Since India has very weak data security provisions and Indian companies are known to be very lax about their data security, the EU does not give data secure status to India, which means Indian tech companies will have to bear higher cost. And finally, there are service barriers. As I told you, it's very difficult for Indians to secure the Schengen visa, right? Be it for students, be it for working professionals. There are very high thresholds and standards and criteria. Though some relaxations have been provided, it's not enough. And this will remain a concern for people to people relations. Now, coming to the next topic, Donald Trump threatening Denmark over Greenland. Another major development this year. So let's take a quick look and then we'll move on to the last few remaining topics. So let's start this with a practice question. With reference to the Davis Strait, consider the following statements. Can you try and answer this question? It lies between Greenland and USA. It connects the Arctic Ocean with the North Atlantic Ocean. What's the right answer? The Davis Strait has been in the news because of Trump's claims being made over Greenland. So it's a very important location that you must be aware of, an important geographical feature. What's the correct answer? Is it one only, two only, both one and two, neither one nor two? I'll show you the map and I'll explain, but first, can you try and answer this? Many of them are saying B. Let's check. Statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is right. Very good. Many of you have answered correctly. 2 only is the right answer. Option B is correct. Now, please look at the map. This is where Greenland is located between North America, the Scandinavia or the Nordic region, right here in the Atlantic, and between Arctic Ocean and the Atlantic, right? That's why Greenland occupies a strategic location and it's a massive territory, which is largely frozen and it has permafrost conditions. You can see the administrative capital, Nuuk, but it remains a Danish territory. The sovereignty of Denmark, right? So there's a great history behind it. The Danes eventually, who were expeditionary and colonial, they managed to take over Greenland from the native Inuit population. And eventually it has been integrated into the Kingdom of Denmark. But during World War II, when Hitler, Nazi Germany, was largely occupying parts of Europe and they invaded Denmark, Denmark even fell. The then Danish ambassador to the US, he sent an urgent request on his own, without permission from the Danish king, to save Greenland at least. And he entered into a deal. The Danish ambassador in the US entered into a deal with the US government, asking US to protect Greenland. So based on this agreement, the US defended Greenland, deployed its forces, set up military bases. And after the World War ended, the Kingdom of Denmark recognized this treaty. Though it was signed without the permission of the Kingdom of Denmark, right? It was pushed by the ambassador of Denmark. It recognized the security implications that US had protected Greenland, a Danish territory, and Denmark and US entered into a security agreement under which US gave security guarantees to protect Greenland. So from then onwards, US set up multiple military bases, even NATO bases were set up, and this became a frontline region mainly to keep a check on Soviet military deployments, especially to monitor Soviet submarine movements and Soviet missile launches. If at all USSR were to launch a nuclear ballistic missile towards North America, towards US, Greenland would be like the first line of defense. So US set up multiple radars and air defense systems to intercept any possible Soviet missile launches and to keep watch on Soviet submarine movement from Arctic towards the Atlantic. So there's a lot of strategic military significance, geopolitical significance attached to Greenland. And today, the US has shut down most of the bases. It maintains just one prominent base. But Trump has a different interest in Greenland. It's not just purely strategic and military, it's also about economic wealth and resources. Now, look at the map here. You can see the Arctic Ocean, right? This is the Canadian territory, largely in the Arctic Circle. You can see the Greenland Sea over here. This is Iceland and the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this is where the Davis Strait is present. That's why the statement one is wrong. Davis Strait is not between Greenland and US. It's located between Greenland and Canada. This is the Baffin Bay. So there is an Arctic sea route that comes through the Canadian territory via Baffin Bay and Davis Strait. And from here, you can reach the Atlantic. This is one of the routes, but it's slightly complicated because of the small archipelago territories that are present here. The other direct route between Arctic and Atlantic is through the Greenland Sea. Now, these are narrow choke points, which has been very, very significant since the Cold War era. Even European navies of Britain, France, Germany, they would depend on these waters to keep a check on Russian-Soviet movement. Right? The whole NATO has always attached a great deal of military strategic significance to these waters and the territory of Greenland. So Denmark has granted autonomy to Greenland. Greenland has its own administrative autonomy to some extent, while accepting the sovereignty of Denmark. There has been talk of a referendum, but most Greenlanders, they support the sovereignty of Denmark. So now Donald Trump has raised the sovereignty claims, and he has even been threatening Denmark openly. Right? He issued military threats. He used economic tariffs to threaten Denmark and the people of Greenland to submit or to face the wrath of the US armed forces. Now, please understand, the Arctic Circle is gaining a lot of significance and prominence, especially because of the melting ice caps. There are new sea routes which are opening up. Russia itself is creating the Northern Sea route via the Arctic. Then you have China, which is also making inroads. In fact, Russia, China, they are deploying icebreaker ships. Russia even has a nuclear powered icebreaker to keep clearing the ice to open up the shipping channels, which will cut the travel distance between the Western and Eastern hemisphere. Right? Plus, China is scouting for wealth and resources and critical minerals, from uranium to lithium. And Greenland is blessed with plenty of wealth and resources. China has been picking up investments, pushing its Belt and Road Initiative. And according to reports, Russian, Chinese, and naval deployments have gone up. Not just their naval vessels, even naval submarine deployments have increased. So this is seen as a military strategic threat by the US. That's one of the primary reasons. The US fears that it only has a limited military presence and nobody has, as of now, utilized the wealth and resources of Greenland, and China might overtake US and others to establish its predominant position. So that is what is pushing US to adopt this aggressive policy. So the Pituffik space base that you see here is the last remaining American military base, which acts as air defense barrier. If at all Russia were to launch its intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles aimed at US, The only hope US has to intercept them is by picking up the trajectory and the launch through the Pacific space base along with its space assets, and then launch interceptor missiles. So if mainland US has to be protected from any possible Russian missile attack, right, then Greenland is absolutely critical for them. See, right now, US can continue to hold its military base. It can even expand its military base. Denmark is not stopping it because they already have an agreement where Denmark has allowed US to set up as many military bases it wants, deploy as many weapons and troops as it wants. That's why experts believe that these claims of Trump is not just about military or strategic priorities. If US was really worried about Russian Chinese military presence, then Denmark has never stopped US from setting up more bases, putting more troops and weapons. US was the one which had withdrawn everything. So this leads to another uncomfortable question as to what is the true interest of Trump. It's believed that Trump is largely acting at the behest of the American industry. Some of the billionaires, the big tech, and the big corporate giants of US, they've kept their sights on Greenland's wealth and resources. See, China, as I told you, has made a big move, and there are Chinese investments into uranium mining in Greenland. This has led to some panic in the US government in the Silicon Valley. And apparently, China is making inroads in critical mineral investments as well in Greenland. So they want to prevent this. They want to ensure American companies, American corporate interests will capitalize on all the wealth and resources. Because, see, to power the future of AI, to produce enough semiconductor chips, batteries, etc., you need precious minerals, critical strategic minerals, from graphite, copper, to uranium, to lithium, and even other precious metals, gold, diamonds, etc. And it's also believed, it's estimated that Greenland holds a lot of hydrocarbon reserves, both oil and gas reserves. So something which is very precious to the American capitalist bloc. So just look at the map here. Greenland is blessed with a variety of mineral wealth and resources, from copper to diamond, gold, graphite, iron, nickel, rare earths, including titanium, vanadium, tungsten, zinc, and along with that, hydrocarbons, and as well as uranium deposits. So that explains the primary interest of the United States. So a question related to this could be either on the location of Greenland and some of the geographical features, or the resources of Greenland, or a probable history related question with regard to US Denmark agreement, the security agreement between them. So this is more than enough. Now let's move to the next topic. The German Chancellor carried out a very high profile and important visit to India. And let's quickly understand what was the relevance and the importance of this particular visit. The German Chancellor visited India, and India's Defense Minister followed it up with a recent visit to Germany. So let's first start with a question. Please take up the statements here. India and Germany are on the verge of signing a $8 billion submarine manufacturing agreement. The deal is under Project 75I of the Indian Navy to procure advanced attack submarines. Under the deal, Germany would transfer nuclear submarine technology to India. So let me give you the answer straight away. India and Germany are definitely on the verge of a mega defense deal where India is trying to contract the technology for attack submarines. So statement one is absolutely correct. That's why Defense Minister Rajnath Singh recently visited Germany, and it's a topic which is in the news. And very soon this deal can be announced. It can be one of the biggest submarine deals or defense deals in the world. And under the deal, it's basically under Project 75I of Indian Navy. This is also correct. We are looking to procure advanced conventional attack submarines, diesel electric submarines, which have air independent propulsion. Because see, diesel electric submarines, they have a big limitation. They have to regularly surface. They have to come to the surface to recharge their batteries, to take in fresh air and oxygen. And that could expose them to enemy surveillance, right? That compromises the stealth capabilities of a submarine. So if the submarine is equipped with air independent propulsion, AIP technology, then even diesel electric submarines can remain submerged for prolonged periods of time, for several weeks or few months, which increases their stealth capabilities. So we are looking to procure these submarines from Germany with air independent propulsion under Project 75I. So this is also a correct statement. Under the deal, Germany would transfer nuclear submarine technology to India. This is wrong. It's incorrect. Right? No country would so easily transfer nuclear submarine technology. Understood? So 3 is wrong. 3 is incorrect. 1 and 2 only. Option A is the right answer. Now, please make a note of Project 75I. What type of submarine are we procuring? It's conventional diesel electric attack submarines with air independent propulsion. Clear? And it's designed and developed by the famous German company ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems will enter into a contract with Musgau Dock Limited. See, Musgau Dock Limited has a lot of experience in building foreign submarines. Under Project 75, the previous submarine project of Indian Navy, India procured the Scorpene class of diesel electric submarines from France. It was Musgau Dock Limited which built 6 Scorpene submarines in India, which are now inducted into the Indian Navy under the Kalvari class. Under the INS Kalvari class, half a dozen Scorpene submarines, which are diesel electric conventional submarines, have been inducted. So based on this expertise, Musgau Dock Limited is entering into this contract with ThyssenKrupp, and the Type 214 next generation submarines. This is the variant, the exact variant of submarine that we are looking to procure with transfer of technology, so it can be indigenously produced in India. So most likely India will buy 6 such submarines. Clear? They'll be produced in India, made in India entirely, and Germany is likely to transfer the technology to Musgau Dock Limited. Next, Bangladesh was in the news because of the elections. And there's one particular topic which is relevant for prelims, the July Charter. UPSC might ask you, the July Charter, the term was in news with regard to which country? Or what is the July Charter of Bangladesh? So that is something you need to know. I'll not go into all the details. I'm sure you would have heard of the massive uprising against Sheikh Hasina, how Awami League government was toppled, how there was an interim government under Muhammad Yunus, which became hostile to India. And finally, following the recent elections, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party has won under its new leader, Tariq Rahman, the son of former Prime Minister Khalida Zia, who recently passed away. Because of all these developments, Bangladeshi elections can be very important. There won't be analysis questions. It's a purely mains topic, but UPSC might ask about the July Charter. What is the July Charter of Bangladesh? What is it related to? See, the July Charter, it's a reference to the July protests of 2024, which toppled Sheikh Hasina's regime. So there was a lot of popular anger against Sheikh Hasina, who was labeled as an authoritarian leader who had misused the office of the Prime Minister. So the July Charter pushes a set of constitutional reforms. So people of Bangladesh, when they voted in the recent national elections, they also voted in a national referendum to amend their constitution. And this charter is called the July Charter. It seeks to curb some of the powers of the Prime Minister, distribute some of the powers to the President of Bangladesh, and brings out many other constitutional changes. For example, it has created a bicameral legislature so that the party which is in majority in the lower house will not get to dominate national politics. So if there is a bicameral legislature with an upper house, it acts as a system of checks and balances, like how India has a Rajya Sabha, which can keep the Lok Sabha in check. A similar bicameral legislature is being established. Prime Minister's term has been curbed. On the term, limits have been placed. A new Judicial Appointments Commission to ensure the independence of the judiciary. Anti-defection provisions to prevent party-to-party defections. And many other changes, increasing women's representation, enhancing the powers of the president, so that The president can counteract the power and influence of the prime minister, expanding fundamental rights and protecting judicial independence. So these constitutional changes have been approved through this national referendum, which was held parallelly with the national elections. So this charter is called the July Charter. The charter recommended these constitutional changes pushed by the interim government under Muhammad Yunus, and majority of the people have voted yes for these constitutional reforms. So July Charter is a reference to these constitutional reforms of Bangladesh. Now let's talk about India's budgetary allocation with regard to foreign policy. This again can be a topic for prelims. In the union budget, what is the allocation given to the foreign ministry and different countries where we provide aid and assistance? India is one of the leading providers of overseas development assistance, or ODA. The Ministry of External Affairs runs a very massive ODA program where we provide loans, concessional grants, and lines of credit to developing and underdeveloped countries in the global south. So in the budget, the overall allocation for the Ministry of External Affairs has only seen a modest increase. Previous allocation was roughly 20,500 crores. It has increased just to around 22,100 crores. So that shows the budgetary allocation is not in line with India's foreign policy ambitions. I mean, that can't be the budget of a major aspiring global power, right? Even countries like Singapore have a much bigger budget than India. They have more diplomats than India. But again, of course, you have to be realistic, that you have to understand India's limitations as well. We have a very modest foreign policy budget, and the increase also has been very modest. But this modest amount is quite effectively utilized for overseas development partnership, where we invest in other countries, carry out developmental programs. Almost 7,000 crores out of this is assigned for overseas development partnership, which is 31% of the total ministry's budget. Now let's see which countries get the maximum allocation. Please remember, Bhutan always gets the maximum budgetary support from India. Out of the total 7,000 crores that we are setting aside, Bhutan roughly gets 2,200 crores each time, and it keeps on increasing every year. Since independence, India is the one financing Bhutan's budget, right? So almost it's like a protectorate state of India, and India is the leading provider of financial support. We invest in Bhutan's developmental projects, and we essentially prop up Bhutan's economy. The second big recipient would be Nepal, with allocation of nearly 800 crores. Bangladesh saw a sharp reduction of 50%, which is a reflection of the ties that were affected because of the hostility of Muhammad Yunus's interim government. So the budgetary allocation, it's a sign of our foreign relations as well. So Bangladesh saw a 50% cut. Aid for Afghanistan was increased by 50 crores because of improving ties with Taliban. As India has reached out to Taliban, Taliban ministers have visited India, and now we are formally engaging with the Taliban regime. You can directly see the impact with the increase in budgetary allocation. Allocation for Sri Lanka also has increased. See, India has pumped $4 billion worth of assistance to Sri Lanka to revive its economy after the 2022 economic crisis. So India continues to provide more assistance. It was recently hit by a deadly cyclone, right? Sri Lanka was devastated by this cyclone just a few months ago in November 2025. So India has been pumping more money to assist Sri Lanka and its economy. Maldives has seen a small cut, a small reduction, but India remains a key investor in Maldives. In fact, India is funding a $500 million project called the Greater Malay Connectivity Project. It's a very ambitious project to interconnect the small islands of Maldives. Around 3-4 islands are being interconnected through sea bridges, which are being built by India and funded entirely by India. It's a $500 million project. Then for Mauritius, the allocation has gone up by 10%, showing the close ties with Mauritius. For Myanmar, it has been cut by 14%, which is a reflection of the civil war and the instability in Myanmar. See, the Myanmar's military junta has been losing control. Rebels are gaining more territorial space. And Myanmar also recently conducted elections, by the way. Right? 3 major elections took place in our neighboring countries. One was Bangladesh, the other was Nepal, where a new party and a very young and new leader, Balendra Shah, has won the elections following the deadly Gen Z protests. Right? So our neighborhood has seen a lot of upheaval and instability. After the protests in Bangladesh, we had a hostile relationship with the interim government. Now the elections have brought a new government, a new leader who is reaching out to India, setting up friendly ties again with India. In Nepal as well, we have seen a big change. The Gen Z protests kicked out the old regime, the corrupt old leaders, and a new regime is in place. And we are yet to see how the relations will develop. Myanmar is another case which has gone through years of civil war. And now the elections were also largely a scam. The military has manipulated the elections. A military backed party, the USDP, has won the elections. And Myanmar's military chief is automatically becoming the president as well. He has resigned as the army chief and he is moving into politics and appointing himself as the president. So it does affect our ties with Myanmar, but it remains a key country. So budget allocation has been cut by around 14%. For African countries, it remains at a steady 225 crores, showing the priority that we have for Africa. For Latin America, allocation has doubled. That shows the priority we are giving for Latin America, especially for resource-rich countries like Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. For Eurasian countries, there is a slight dip, and the overall aid that we provide is around 5,600 crores. See, aid is different from loan. Loan has to be paid back, right? The loans, the line of credit we provide, these are concessional loans. They come with flexible repayment period, very low interest. But grant or aid, you're basically giving it as a donation, right? So we help many countries that go through a crisis, and that is a reflection of the aid that we provide through our foreign policy. Then one important point, allocation for Chabahar port has been reduced to zero. This is a reflection of the US-Iran tensions, the American sanctions on Iran, and now, of course, the war which has broken out. Chabahar port was seen as critical for India for almost 20 plus years. It would allow us to bypass Pakistan and it would help us access Afghanistan and Central Asia. India had invested hundreds of millions of dollars to develop the Chabahar port and the Shahid Beheshti terminal. But now, because of the state of ties between US and Iran and Trump's pressure tactics, India is likely backing off from the Chabahar project. So this creates a lot of uncertainty, right? No funds have been allocated to the Chabahar port project. So I've given the entire table over here, and I think you can go through this later. Please take a screenshot or you can download the PDF. The link is provided below, and I'll share the PDF by tomorrow on my Telegram channel. Clear? I'll update my Telegram channel link also in the description box after the session ends. So just follow me on Telegram. I'll be sharing the PDF here as well. So please go through this table. Just be aware of which country, which region is getting what kind of allocation from India. Next topic, last few topics, we'll wrap it up in another few minutes. The New START treaty has expired. Now this is a big setback for global stability. Because see, the New START, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, it was keeping a check on the nuclear arsenal and the delivery systems of US and Russia. Now, so with the expiry of New START, there is no arms control treaty or arms reduction treaty between the two biggest nuclear powers. So when you look at the history between these two nuclear states, during the Cold War period, believe it or not, these countries cumulatively had 60,000-70,000 warheads each, which was more than enough to destroy the whole planet. But thanks to arms control and reduction treaties, from 1970s, there has been a reduction in the nuclear arsenal of these two powers. So first we had the SALT I in 1972. For the first time, a cap was placed on the nuclear arsenal of both countries. However, it did not provide for a proper reduction of the nuclear warheads and the delivery systems. In 1991, after USSR collapsed and Russia was the successor state, the START I was created, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 1, which gave specific targets to be achieved to reduce the number of warheads and delivery systems. But it did not have a verification regime. They couldn't verify whether the other side was following it or not. Then came the SALT or Moscow Treaty with a proper reduction and verification mechanism that was brought into effect in 2002. But however, START 1 would expire in 2009. Then SALT would also expire by 2012. So there was a need to replace them, and US and Russia had started negotiations for START 2 and START 3, but they were never concluded. They were never signed, or it never took effect because the talks were never concluded. So finally, it was New START signed in 2010, which came into force in 2011, that replaced the SALT. It replaced the Treaty of Moscow, and it remained as the sole arms reduction and control treaty between them. Because previously, the INF, which dealt with intermediate launch systems, intermediate range missiles, and nuclear forces, the US quit this treaty under Donald Trump during his first presidency. It mainly had restricted the intermediate range nuclear forces of both sides, especially the medium range, short range ballistic missiles had been restricted. But Trump had quit this, and New START was the last arms reduction treaty between them. So this was expiring in 2021, 2022, and the Biden administration had extended it by another 4 or 5 years. So February 2026 is when it was set to expire. But before that, when Russia invaded Ukraine and US targeted Russia with sanctions, Russia had suspended its participation under the New START. Though it did not withdraw, it was still party to the treaty. It had suspended the participation, meaning it was not sharing data, it was not allowing on-site inspections to take place. And US was also doing the same. So now both sides have allowed the treaty to lapse. They should have renegotiated and renewed, or at least brought in a new treaty, or at least extended it for the time being. And they have done none of this. So with no arms reduction and control treaty between them, it throws open the possibility of a new arms race between them. And Trump has ordered the US military to go for nuclear testing and modernization of its nuclear forces, as Trump says that China and its nuclear arsenal is a threat. So that's why the topic is important. So under the New START, there is a clear limit on both sides that they can hold only 1,550 nuclear warheads, not more than that. Imagine from 60, 70,000 to just 1,550. Their delivery systems it was capped at 700 deployed ICBMs, SLBMs, and heavy strategic bombers. Plus, it had a proper verification regime with both sides allowing on-site inspections, sharing data, and notifying each other of any changes and upgradation in their policy. Now, this has expired. It doesn't exist anymore. So this makes the world much more dangerous. Next, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Malaysia. There is one specific point which is important. We don't have to cover everything. Most of it is mains related. But for prelims, the PM's visit to Malaysia recently can be relevant with regard to one specific development. India's UPI has been rolled out in Malaysia as well. Right? UPSC had asked one such question. We have rolled out UPI in Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, France, in United Arab Emirates. Then even countries like Trinidad, Tobago, Ghana, many of them have shown interest, and very soon we'll be rolling it out in these countries. So Malaysia also has joined the list. So please make a note. And India has inaugurated the Thiruvalluvar Center that links Tamil heritage, Tamil literature, Tamil philosophy, which is a living connection between India and Malaysia. Malaysia is a home to a very large Indian diaspora, and majority of them are of Tamil origin. A very strong Tamil community is present in Malaysia. So a Thiruvalluvar Cultural Center was inaugurated with Thiruvalluvar scholarships being provided from the Indian side. So there can be a straightforward basic question related to it. So just make a note of this. Then an island disputed between South Korea and Japan was in the news. Generally, you read about disputed islands in the context of China. China, Japan have a disputed island, right? China has disputes with other Southeast Asian countries. But South Korea, Japan, though they are allies, they are partners, friends, they are both close to US, they have a standing territorial dispute over a small group of rock islands. and you should know the name and location. It's called Takeshima in Japan. It's known as Dokdo in South Korea. Where is it located? It's located in the Sea of Japan. See, this is South Korea. You can see the Korean peninsula. This is North Korea. And this would be South Korea here. And this would be Japan. Right? In the Sea of Japan, you have the Takeshima Islands. It's actually controlled by South Korea. So there's a lot of history behind it. Japan used to control it, but later on, after it lost Second World War, South Korea took control of Takeshima. And in Korean language, it's called Dokdo. But Japan still claims its sovereignty over it because Japan never gave up its territorial rights over Takeshima Islands. And even US acknowledges that. But South Korea maintains control over Dokdo Islands. So it has remained a standing dispute between both sides. So please be aware of the location and the countries involved in the dispute. Because one such question was asked on Senkaku Islands that are located nearby in East China Sea. You have the Senkaku Islands, roughly over here, which is disputed between China and Japan. UPSC has already asked a question on Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. So please note Takeshima or Dokdo Islands. Next, AI Impact Summit. India hosted this high-profile event on AI governance and AI regulation. So let's start with a basic question. The Bletchley Declaration that was adopted at the 2023 AI Summit. It primarily dealt with what? Making AI inclusive and environmentally sustainable, or AI safety and managing AI risks, financing Global South to help them adopt AI, integration of AI into global manufacturing and defense industries. See, the Bletchley Declaration was adopted at the first AI Summit, also called the AI Safety Summit. The main focus of the first AI Summit was on AI safety and managing the risks associated with AI. For example, what if harmful AI is developed, which could harm humanity, which could harm democracies and fundamental rights and human rights? How to contain and prevent the development of harmful AI? How to ensure AI risks are minimized for global economy? These are the issues discussed at the AI Safety Summit in UK, which led to the Bletchley Declaration. So B is the right answer. AI safety and managing AI risk was the focus of Bletchley Declaration. Now, just to give you a brief overview of the AI Summit, it was launched in 2023, hosted by UK for the first time, and it was hosted at the famous Bletchley Park. That's where Alan Turing broke the Enigma code of the Nazis, which was a turning point in World War II. So it was symbolic to hold the summit here. This is the birthplace of modern computing, right? And that's why the first AI summit was held at Bletchley Park, which led to the Bletchley Declaration. And the whole focus here was AI safety, tackling AI risks, preventing the development of harmful AI, etc. The second AI summit was held in Seoul in South Korea, but it did not lead to any major outcomes. Then came the third AI summit, the AI Action Summit in Paris in 2025, which was co-hosted by India. India was a co-host and France was the primary host. This focused on inclusive development of AI, sustainability, etc. So it led to a statement on inclusive sustainable AI. A public interest AI platform incubator was set up. Coalition for environmentally sustainable AI was launched with UN Environment Program. These were some key outcomes of AI Action Summit. And UPSC has already asked a basic question on AI Action Summit. So now coming to the fourth summit, the AI Impact Summit hosted by India. What are the key outcomes? Where questions can come? That is something you should understand. See, India was hosting this high profile event with global leaders from Emmanuel Macron to Lula da Silva being present. And we had all the big AI and tech companies and their CEOs present as well. So massive investments were discussed. But India's priority was to ensure that AI remains focused on the principle of equity and inclusivity. Ensure that Global South gets access to AI. because it should not be restricted to the rich and developed countries. Even developing, underdeveloped nations should be able to draw the benefits. It should not create a world of haves and have-nots. So that was the primary focus of India. Ensure that AI tools, especially LLMs, large language models, your generative AI bots and tools are available in all languages, even in regional vernacular languages. Ensure that AI is safe and it can be trusted. These were the focus areas. So during the AI Impact Summit, $250 billion worth of investment commitments were made from governments and private sector. Cumulatively, the public and private investment, these are commitments, these are just promises of sorts, up to $250 billion worth investments, with 20 billion going into deep tech research, into the core of AI, development of LLM models or neural networks, machine learning. So $20 billion into frontier deep tech research. This is where India announced that we are signing the Pax Silicon initiative, becoming a member of Pax Silicon initiative. Then India managed to bring out consensus with more than 88 countries. From US to France to UK, we convinced many of the global powers with the private tech companies to adopt the New Delhi Declaration on AI. Now, under the New Delhi Declaration, the goals, the targets are non-binding. It's of course voluntary. It's not legally binding. But please note down the key outcomes of New Delhi Declaration. In order to promote democratic diffusion of AI, India has included an entire statement on the democratic principles that should rule and govern AI. Meaning AI should not get into the hands of authoritarian regimes who can abuse and misuse AI tools to oppress their people. It should ensure that AI will enable democratic governance to provide better governance, better delivery of services in an equitable, inclusive manner. So all sections of humanity can benefit from the advances of AI. A global AI impact commons has been announced, which will be a database of the use cases, the best experience of other countries, where AI has been practically used in governance, in delivering public services. This will be documented in the database. Let's say, for example, India successfully implemented an AI model to improve education or healthcare. Now we will document this use case on the global AI impact commons, and maybe another country like Mexico or Indonesia, they will study this use case from India and adapt this to their context. Then a similar trusted AI common platform. It will be a database, a repository of AI tools, the benchmarks and the best practices that can be replicated, followed across the world. Maybe a company like Anthropic or OpenAI, they come out with some new best practices and standards. They will document this on Trusted AI Commons, where even small startups from India can learn and adapt them into the Indian context. International network for AI science institutions to promote research collaboration between scientific institutions and tech startups. AI for social empowerment platform, AI workforce development playbook and reskilling principles, and guiding principles on resilient, efficient AI. These three initiatives were also launched, mainly to promote human resource training and development and skilling and upskilling, and create social empowerment through AI, and ensure that AI is resilient and efficient to benefit the society and larger humanity. So these were the key outcomes. Just make a note, by heart this, you have to remember this, right? There can be a standard question on the key outcomes of New Delhi Declaration or AI Impact Summit. You just have to remember these basic facts. And also, India's leading AI startup, Sarvam AI, a Bengaluru-based startup, launched India's first multi-billion parameter LLM, which is in some ways comparable to a ChatGPT or Claude. Not exactly the same. Their capabilities are on a different scale altogether, right? But in some ways, at least structurally, foundationally, the LLM model of Sarvam AI is pretty similar, and it is our first indigenously developed multi-billion parameter LLM model. Next, the US Supreme Court that struck down Trump's tariffs. This also can be a prelims topic. There are a couple of points, I think, which can come as a prelims question. See, we don't have to go into the details because that is a pure mains oriented topic. Like what kind of tariffs were levied, which industries were hit, what was India's response. The analysis is not necessary at all. You just have to remember the legal framework through which these tariffs were levied. Now, when you look at the US Constitution, right, the president or the executive branch of the US government doesn't have the authority, the constitutional mandate to levy tariffs. This is vested with the US Congress. Only and only the US Congress can levy taxes, and that includes your tariffs. This, in a way, is similar to our Indian Constitution, right? It's primarily the parliament which has the authority to approve any new taxes that are proposed by the government. Government will propose it, but parliament has to approve it. Similarly, in United States, it's the US Congress which has the power, not the president. So how did Trump levy these tariffs then? See, the president has an emergency power, and you have to remember this law. Maybe this act can be asked. Under what powers did President Trump levy these tariffs? Could be a probable question. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Under this congressional law, if the US is facing a financial emergency, let's say it is facing a sudden devaluation of the US dollar, or let's say it's facing a huge trade deficit on its balance of payments, right? Or if a country is resorting to unfair trade practices, under such specific situations, the US can declare that it is dealing with an international economic emergency. Or let's say there is a hostile country causing an economic and strategic challenge to US. It can levy sanctions on them as well. Under this emergency law, the president can levy tariffs. But there are restrictions and limitations. But since Trump had breached the norms, that's why the Supreme Court has struck down the tariffs, declaring them unconstitutional. Now, US has to provide tax refunds to the importers who had paid these tariff duties. That's another point. But Trump has announced a new set of tariffs. Since the old tariffs were struck down by the Supreme Court entirely, including the 50% tariffs on India, now Trump has brought a 10% baseline tariff for every country. So these tariffs are levied under two legislations. Please remember this: the Trade Act of 1974 and Tariff Act of 1930. The US president can use the Trade Act if there is a BOP crisis, a big deficit developing on the current account, or if the US currency is rapidly devaluing. Then, under the Trade Act, the president can levy tariffs to protect the American currency and also to minimize the current account deficit. Then, under the Tariff Act, the president can levy tariffs up to 50% if a country is resorting to unfair trade practices that's harming American exports and American producers. Clear? So just remember these American legislations. Though the topic is not actually part of our syllabus, it can be asked since it is related to the American tariffs on India. Now we come to the last topic for today. This is a security related topic related to Northeast India. Because this is a big development. The government of India entered into a tripartite agreement with the civil society groups and political associations in eastern Nagaland, with the government of Nagaland as well, granting administrative autonomy to 6 districts in eastern Nagaland. A new administrative body is being set up called FNTA. So let's quickly understand the topic and we will close the discussion after this. See, from a long time, 6 districts in eastern Nagaland that share a strategic border with Myanmar, they have had a grievance. The grievance is that the eastern part of Nagaland, these 6 districts have largely been neglected. This includes Longlang, Tuansang, Mon, Noklak, Shamator and Kipre. These 6 districts historically have faced administrative neglect even during British rule. And after independence, much of Nagaland was part of the larger state of Assam. And as Naga insurgency had started, then India tried to counter the insurgency led by Naga National Council. And to pacify the insurgents and the separatists, India carved out Nagaland as a separate state in 1963. The Naga areas were carved out of the larger state of Assam and made a separate state in 1963. So Kohima became the capital and Western Nagaland became politically, economically dominant. Please understand within Nagas, there are many subgroups, subclans. The Naga identity is a very large, broad identity, a ethnic identity. Within the Naga identity, there are many subclans and subgroups of Nagas. So the Kohima region, the western part of Nagaland, became politically, economically dominant, and this is where Naga insurgents were primarily centered, especially the NSCN that was formed in 1980, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland. So these insurgents and some of the influential elements controlled the administrative economic setup, and eastern Nagaland always has felt neglected. This is also the remote area with hilly terrain, forested areas, and shares the delicate, sensitive, porous border with Myanmar. So for many years, they have been demanding autonomy. In fact, they wanted a separate state. They wanted Eastern Nagaland to be made a separate state. But after several rounds of talks and negotiations, the Indian government, the Home Ministry, along with government of Nagaland, have convinced the civil society groups and political associations to settle for limited autonomy within the ambit of our constitution. So the demands had to be accepted because this is a delicate, sensitive region. Because see, India-Myanmar border is prone to infiltration by insurgents, by organized criminals. And the threat has gone up in recent years after Myanmar became unstable. So, keeping the security strategic concerns in mind and some of the genuine, legitimate demands of the people of Nagaland under a group called NPO, India has agreed to set up this new administrative entity by granting limited administrative and executive autonomy to the 6 districts of Eastern Nagaland. So, India would be dedicating a 500 crore package. This was announced before the autonomy was given. A promise of additional development with additional funding was made, but this did not improve the situation. So now a new autonomous body would be created called FNTA. The FNTA would administer these 6 eastern districts. It will have its own secretariat. So how the government of Nagaland has a secretariat in Kohima, in the capital. The FNTA, which will be like a semi-autonomous body, right? It will govern and administer these areas under specific subjects. Around 46 subjects have been identified. This covers agriculture, rural development, and local infrastructure, education, local health. All these issues will be devolved to the FNTA. And this local body, which will be made up of the Naga groups from the 6 districts, they will administer these areas. But this will not affect the special provisions given under Article 371 Clause A. Under Article 371 Clause A, Nagaland enjoys a special protection, a constitutional protection, in order to protect the customary laws and the social practices and rituals of the Naga tribe, the Naga identity. So this would not be touched, it would not be affected. But for ensuring better administration to deliver better governance and public services, the FNTA will be acting as a semi-autonomous body, and it will have a secretariat of its own, and the central government would help in establishing this new administrative entity. So please make a note of this topic, very, very important. And last one here would be India-Canada relations. So here I don't want you to waste your time. I just want you to focus on the uranium deal, the India-Canada uranium deal that was announced. Mark Carney visited India. A lot of agreements were signed. But I think what's relevant for prelims exam, it would be the uranium deal that we have signed with Canada. Because see, India depends heavily on uranium imports. Nearly 70% of our uranium requirement for our nuclear power plants is met through imports. So we have a civil nuclear deal with Kazakhstan, with Russia, with Namibia, with Australia as well. All these countries can be leading suppliers of uranium to India. Recently, we have signed a big deal with Kazakhstan, which is the world's largest uranium producer. And it has the second largest reserves as well. Right? Australia very soon could become a key supplier. It has the world's largest uranium reserves and second largest producer. So now Canada, which is also one amongst the largest producer of uranium, has entered into a deal with India, and it will be a $2 billion deal under which nearly 10,000 tons of uranium would be supplied. Now, this is crucial for our energy security, for our climate action plans. Because see, right now, our nuclear capacity is around 9 gigawatts. Our ambitious goal is to increase this 10x by 10 times to achieve 100 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2047, when India becomes a developed nation as a Viksit Bharat. So that's a goal which has been laid down to increase our nuclear capacity by 10 times, which means we need massive uranium because we are deficient. We don't have sufficient uranium reserves. Despite some of the domestic mines we have, it's not enough to meet the ambition. That's why Kazakhstan, Namibia, Russia, Australia, and Canada will be very critical. So now we have signed a deal with Canada that will last for several years till 2035, and Canada would be supplying nearly 10,000 tons of uranium to India. So this was another big development. So I think on this note, we can conclude the session for today. We've covered easily 30 plus topics and subtopics. All of them are very factual and based on all recent events and developments. Now, if you observed, I've not covered anything related to Iran war. Why? Because I've already covered the topic under phase 4 on the app where we discussed high yielding topics. And I'll be covering it again, especially some of the weapon systems and maps and locations in the upcoming marathon. We'll be having a final revision series starting from first week of May. So on 8th of May, make a note, I'll be taking a IR marathon, trying to cover all the topics in the last 12-18 months, primarily through maps and locations. So there I'll cover some of the newer topics under Iran war. And rest, I think we have covered almost everything under the 5-phase program of Conquer Prelims. I hope you guys are liking the initiative, benefiting from this. Please keep the PPTs with you, make notes, and I'll be sharing it on my Telegram channel by tomorrow as well. And as I told you, I'll add the link of my Telegram channel in the description box below. So that's it for today. On this note,